Sometimes the hardest walls we build aren't made of stone. They're made of years spent alone, convinced no one will stay. Sabine Cross lived high in the mountains, tougher than any man who'd tried to match her pace. Cowboys came with swagger and left with shame, none lasting a week against her brutal way of life. Then Jonas Calder arrived at her cabin door. He was young, honest, and known in town as the Virgin Cowboy. No gambling, no whiskey, just quiet determination. When he swore he wouldn't leave, Sabine laughed, but he stayed. Day after hard day, he stayed. What would finally break through the heart of a woman who'd learned to need no one? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The mountains didn't forgive weakness. Sabine Cross had learned that truth before she could properly hold a rifle, and in the 16 years since her father passed, she'd proven it every single day. The high country of Montana's northern ranges was no place for the faint of heart, and Sabine had built a life there that would break most men inside a week. She woke before dawn, and always, to the sound of wind battering the log cabin her grandfather had built with his own hands. The structure sat at nearly 8,000 feet, nestled in a valley where winter could arrive in September and refuse to leave until May. This morning, mid-October, frost coated the single window above her washbasin in crystalline patterns that caught the first grey light. Sabine dressed quickly in the cold. Wool trousers, a flannel shirt worn soft from years of use, her father's old suspenders, and the heavy canvas coat that smelled of wood smoke and pine sap. Her hands, rough and capable, laced up boots that had been resoled 3 times. At 36, she moved with the efficiency of someone who'd eliminated every unnecessary motion from her daily routine. The trapping knife hung at her hip, worn smooth by her father's hand before hers. It had been his and his father's before that. The blade held its edge beautifully, and Sabine maintained it, with the same care she gave to everything that kept her alive in this unforgiving place. She touched it now, a habit, feeling the familiar weight before stepping out into the morning. The air bit at her face, sharp and clean. Her breath misted in great plumes as she crossed the packed earth of her yard toward the woodshed. The axe waited where she'd left it, buried in the chopping stump. She worked for an hour, splitting rounds of lodgepole pine into stove-sized pieces, her muscles falling into the rhythm she'd known since childhood. The physical labor warmed her blood, and by the time the sun finally crested the eastern peaks, she'd stacked enough wood to last 3 days. The work never ended. That was the truth of mountain living that sent the Cowboys running. They arrived full of confidence, these men from the valley ranches, swearing they could match her pace. They'd heard the stories about the woman who trapped her own furs, cut her own timber, hunted elk in winter snows that buried the cabin to its eaves. They came thinking it was exaggeration, or thinking that surely she needed help, or thinking they could tame what they saw as wildness in need of breaking. They were always wrong. Last spring, a ranch hand named Cooper had lasted 4 days. He'd been strong enough, she'd give him that, but he couldn't handle the isolation. The silence of the mountains pressed on him until he invented reasons to ride down to the settlement twice in those 4 days, coming back with whiskey and complaints about the cold. Sabine had sent him off on the morning of the 5th day with his wages and no sympathy. Before Cooper, there'd been a logger named Paul who thought he'd teach her a better way to fell trees. He'd lasted until she outworked him 3 days running, each day leaving him more surly and resentful. When he tried to tell her she was doing it wrong, her, who'd been dropping timber since she was 12, she'd handed him his bedroll and pointed toward the trail. The parade went back years. Trappers, hunters, drifters, ranch hands. Some lasted a day, some made it to 6. Not one had seen a full week. They couldn't match her pace, couldn't handle the solitude, couldn't accept that she didn't need their protection or their guidance or their company. Most of all, they couldn't bear that a woman did this life better than they ever could. Sabine told herself she preferred it this way. The cabin was hers, the land was hers, the life was hers. She answered to no one, depended on no one, needed no one. It was a good life. A hard life, but honest and clean and free. She wouldn't admit even to herself that sometimes the silence felt less like peace and more like emptiness. By mid-morning, she'd checked the near trap lines. 2 martens, both clean catches. She reset the traps with practiced hands, her fingers nimble despite the cold. The pelts would fetch good money when the buyer came through in November. She supplemented her income with the furs, with occasional timber sales. With smoked meat, she traded to the settlement 15 miles down the mountain. The settlement, calling it a town was generous, consisted of a general store, a blacksmith, a livery, and a handful of houses clustered where the trail widened enough for wagons. Sabine went down every few weeks for supplies she couldn't produce herself. Salt, coffee, flour, ammunition. The store owner, a weathered man named Bill Hutchins, had known her father. He treated her with respect, asked no questions, extended credit when she needed it. Others in the settlement were less accommodating. There was talk, always talk. A woman alone wasn't natural, they said. Wasn't safe, wasn't proper. She'd heard the whispers, that she was cold, that she was hard, that she'd end up dying alone up there in winter, and no one would find her body until spring thaw. Let them talk. Their opinions meant nothing measured against the weight of her father's legacy and her own stubborn pride. Her father, Samuel Cross, had been a legend in these mountains. He'd come west after the war, built this cabin, carved out a life through sheer determination. When Sabine's mother died, bringing her into the world, Samuel had raised his daughter alone, teaching her everything he knew. She'd been his shadow, his student, his pride. He'd never treated her as less for being a girl. He'd simply taught her to be more. The mountains don't care if you're man or woman, he'd told her 1,000 times. They only care if you're strong enough to stand. Sabine had stood. For 16 years since the fever took him, she'd stood alone in this high country and refused to bend. The afternoon found her working on the south property line, repairing a section of split-rail fence that a fallen tree had damaged in the last storm. The work was tedious, requiring her to dig post holes in the rocky soil and cut new rails from deadfall timber. Her hands blistered despite the calluses, but she kept at it, knowing that good fences meant the difference between keeping what was yours and losing it to neighbors with wandering, stock or looser definitions of property lines. She was setting the last post when she felt the prickling awareness that she wasn't alone. Sabine straightened slowly, her hand moving automatically to the knife at her hip. Her eyes scanned the tree line, and there, a horse and rider watching her from the shadow of the pines. The rider urged his mount forward, emerging into the slanting afternoon sunlight. Sabine's eyes narrowed, cataloguing details with the automatic wariness of someone who lived alone in wild country. Young, maybe 22 or 23. Lean build, but the way he sat, his horse spoke of years in the saddle. Clean-shaven face, honest eyes, worn but well-maintained gear, and something about him that was different from the usual swagger of the cowboys who came calling. He stopped his horse a respectful distance away and removed his hat. "Ma'am, name's Jonas Calder. I'm looking for Sabine Cross. You found her." Sabine didn't move from the fence line, didn't soften her stance. "State your business. I'm hoping you might have work for me, ma'am." "I heard you sometimes take on help." Sabine almost laughed. "Another one? You heard wrong. I work alone." "I heard you've had men try," Jonas said, his voice steady and polite. "I heard none of them lasted. But I also heard you know these mountains better than anyone living, and I mean to learn that knowledge, if you'll teach me." "Why?" The question was sharp. "Plenty of ranches in the valley hiring hands." "Why ride all the way up here?" Jonas met her eyes directly. "Because ranch work is one thing, ma'am, but surviving in country like this is another. My whole life, I've worked for other men, doing what they told me. I want to learn to stand on my own ground. And I figure the best teacher is someone who's already standing firm." It was a better answer than most gave. Sabine studied him a moment longer, taking in the sincere set of his jaw, the absence of the cocky grin she'd seen on so many faces before. Still, sincerity didn't equal competence, and she had no patience for training men who'd quit when the work got hard. "I don't need help," she said flatly, "and I don't have time to nursemaid greenhorns. I'm not asking you to nursemaid me. I'm asking you to let me work. You don't have to pay me much, just enough for basic provisions. I'll do whatever work you set, and I won't complain about the hours or the conditions. If I can't keep pace, I'll leave on my own. They all say that, Sabine said. They all leave anyway, maybe so. Jonas settled his hat back on his head. But I'm not them, ma'am. I give you my word. I won't leave until you tell me I've earned the right to stay, or until you tell me to go. There was something in the way he said it, a quiet certainty that gave Sabine pause. She'd heard plenty of boasts and promises over the years, but this didn't sound like either. It sounded like simple truth. Still, she'd learned not to trust words over actions. "You know what they call you down in the settlement?" she asked, her tone deliberately harsh. "The virgin cowboy. Because you don't drink, don't gamble, don't chase women. They think you're soft." Jonas's expression didn't change. "Let them think what they want. I know who I am. Do you?" Sabine challenged. "Because who you are down there doesn't mean much up here. Up here, you work 16 hours a day in weather that'll freeze your hands inside your gloves. You go weeks without seeing another soul. You eat what you can catch or grow, and some weeks that's not much. You wake up to wolves testing your fences and go to sleep, wondering if the cabin will still be standing come morning. That's the truth of this life. Can you handle that?" "Don't know," Jonas said simply. "Haven't tried it yet, but I'd like the chance to find out." Sabine wanted to say no. Every instinct told her to send him down the mountain like all the others, to preserve the solitude she'd built and protected for so long. But something in his steady gaze, in the quiet determination of his posture, made her hesitate. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the small, secret part of her that wondered if anyone could actually last. Maybe it was just the practical knowledge that the winter preparations would go faster with an extra pair of hands, even if those hands belonged to someone who'd likely quit before the first real snow. "1 week," she heard herself say. "You last 1 week doing exactly what I tell you, keeping pace without complaint, and we'll talk about whether you stay longer. You fold before then, you ride out and don't come back." "Agreed?" Jonas nodded once. "Agreed, ma'am. And stop calling me ma'am. Name's Sabine." She turned back to her fence post, driving it home with sharp strikes of the post maul. "There's a lean-to behind the cabin. You can stable your horse there and pile your gear inside. We eat at sundown. Don't be late." She didn't watch him ride toward the cabin, didn't let herself acknowledge the flutter of something in her chest that might have been hope or might have been dread. Another cowboy had come to test himself against her mountain. He'd fail like all the others, and then she'd be alone again. That was fine. Alone was safe. Alone was what she knew. But as she finished setting the fence and gathered her tools, Sabine found herself wondering, just for a moment, what it might be like if someone actually stayed. Jonas Calder unsaddled his mare in the lean-to as the sun dropped behind the western peaks, painting the sky in shades of copper and violet. The structure was simple but solid, with 3 walls and a roof that kept the weather off. His horse, a steady bay named Temperance, nickered softly as he rubbed her down with handfuls of dried grass. He'd meant every word he'd said to Sabine Cross. The decision to ride up here hadn't been impulsive. He'd been thinking about it for months, ever since he'd heard the stories about the mountain woman who lived alone and worked harder than any man. Something about those stories had called to him in a way he couldn't quite explain. Jonas had been working ranches since he was 14. When the couple who'd taken him in after his parents died decided a growing boy needed to earn his keep. He'd learned quickly, worked hard, and moved from ranch to ranch as opportunities arose. He was competent with cattle, good with horses, could rope and brand and mend fence with the best of them, but he'd never felt like he belonged in the bunkhouses. The other hands drank and gambled their wages away, spent their Saturday nights in the settlement saloon, boasted about women they'd bedded or fights they'd won. Jonas had tried it once or twice in his younger days, but it had felt hollow. The whiskey burned without warming him, and the company left him lonelier than being alone. So he'd earned his reputation, the virgin cowboy. They called him sometimes with mockery, sometimes with a kind of bewildered respect. He didn't care much either way. He knew what he wanted wasn't found at the bottom of a bottle or in a moment of purchased intimacy. He wanted something real, something that lasted, something he could build with his own hands and know it was truly his. When he'd heard about Sabine Cross, something had clicked into place. Here was someone who'd built exactly that kind of life, alone, against all odds, refusing to compromise or quit. If he could learn from her, maybe he could find his own piece of ground someday and know he had the skills to keep it. He finished with temperance and carried his saddlebags into the lean-to. His possessions were few: extra clothes, basic tools, a bedroll, a tin cup and plate, and his father's pocket watch. He pulled the watch from his vest now, running his thumb over the tarnished silver case. It had stopped working 6 years ago, frozen at 3:47. Jonas had taken it to every tinker and watchmaker he'd encountered in his travels, but none could fix it. Something essential inside was broken beyond their skill to repair. Still, he carried it everywhere, a reminder of the man his father had been, steady, honest, present. Jonas had been 16 when the fever took both his parents within a week of each other. The watch was all he had left of that life before. He tucked it away carefully and headed toward the cabin as full darkness settled over the mountain. Light glowed from the single window, warm and inviting against the cold. Jonas knocked twice on the weathered door before entering. The cabin's interior was spare but organized. A stone fireplace dominated one wall with a cook stove beside it. A rough-hewn table with 2 chairs sat in the center of the single room. Against the far wall, he could see a narrow bed, and above it shelves holding supplies and equipment. Everything had its place. Everything served a purpose. There was no decoration, no softness, nothing that spoke of comfort for comfort's sake. Sabine stood at the stove, stirring something in a cast-iron pot. She'd removed her coat, and Jonas could see the lean strength in her shoulders and arms, the capable way she moved. Her dark hair, streaked with premature silver, was pulled back in a practical braid. "Wash up," she said without turning. "Basins by the door." Jonas did as instructed, scrubbing his hands in the cold water, then took a seat at the table. Sabine ladled stew into 2 bowls, venison by the smell of it, with root vegetables and wild onions. She set one bowl in front of him, along with a hunk of dense bread, then sat across from him with her own meal. They ate in silence. The stew was simple but good, seasoned with herbs Jonas didn't recognize. He was halfway through his bowl when Sabine finally spoke. "You'll start before dawn tomorrow. I'll show you the trap lines, about 8 miles worth, running north and east from here. We check them every other day, reset what's needed, collect any catches. After that, we'll work on cutting firewood. Winter's coming, and I need another 3 cords stacked before the deep snows hit." Jonas nodded. "Yes, ma'am." He caught himself. "Sabine, the work's hard," she continued, her eyes sharp on his face. "And the hours are long. If you can't keep up, say so now, and save us both the trouble." "I'll keep up. We'll see." She took another bite of stew, chewing thoughtfully. "Why aren't you married?" "Man your age should have a wife," family started. The directness of the question caught Jonas off guard, but he answered honestly. "Never found the right woman, I suppose." "Never found one who wanted the kind of life I'm looking for. And what kind of life is that?" Jonas considered his words carefully. "Something real, something built on honest work and straight dealing. A partnership with someone who knows their own mind and isn't looking for someone else to define them." He met her eyes. "I guess I never met a woman who didn't expect me to be something other than what I am." Sabine studied him for a long moment, something flickering in her expression that might have been understanding. "Most people expect others to fill the holes in their own lives. Doesn't work that way. You have to be whole on your own first." "That's what I figure too." She pushed back from the table, collecting the empty bowls. "Bedroll goes in the lean-to unless it's below freezing, then you can sleep by the fire. We rise at 4:30. Don't oversleep." "I won't." Sabine paused at the wash basin, her back to him. "Those other cowboys, they came up here thinking they could tame something wild, thinking they could prove something or fix me or claim some kind of victory. Is that why you're here?" Jonas stood, choosing his words with care. "No, ma'am. I came because I respect what you've built, and I want to learn from it. I'm not here to change you or prove anything except that I'm worth the space I take up. That's all." She glanced over her shoulder at him, her expression unreadable. "We'll see about that. Get some rest. Morning comes early." Jonas headed back out into the cold, settling into the lean-to with his bedroll spread on a pile of fresh straw. The temperature was dropping fast, and he could see his breath in the darkness. Above him, stars blazed in the clear mountain sky, more than he'd ever seen from the valley ranches. He thought about Sabine's question, why he wasn't married. The truth was more complicated than he'd said. He'd seen what happened to men who married without real connection, without genuine partnership. They grew bitter or distant, or they poured themselves into work or drink to avoid going home. His own parents had been different. True partners who'd faced life side by side. That's what he wanted, what he'd been waiting for. Maybe that's why the stories about Sabine had resonated with him. Not because he wanted to rescue her or tame her or any of the foolish notions other men had carried up this mountain, but because she represented something he recognized in himself, the determination to stand alone rather than settle for less than real. Sleep came slowly in the unfamiliar surroundings, but Jonas didn't mind. He'd made his choice and now he'd see it through. 1 week to prove himself worthy of staying. It wouldn't be easy, but nothing worth having ever was. The next morning arrived precisely at 4:30 when Sabine's knock rattled the lean-to wall. Jonas was already awake, had been for 10 minutes, and he emerged into the pre-dawn darkness, ready to work. "Coffee's hot," Sabine said, already walking toward the cabin. "Drink it fast. We leave in 15 minutes. The coffee was strong enough to strip paint, black and bitter, but it cleared the last cobwebs from Jonas's mind. He followed Sabine out as the first grey light touched the eastern sky, both of them carrying packs and walking sticks. The trapline was brutal. 8 miles didn't sound like much until you factored in the terrain. Steep climbs, rocky descents, creek crossings where ice formed at the edges. Sabine moved with the easy confidence of someone who'd walked this route 1,000 times, never slowing, never stopping, except to check the traps. Jonas kept pace, but it cost him. His legs burned on the climbs, his boots slipped on the loose scree, and twice he had to catch himself on his walking stick to avoid falling. Sabine said nothing, but he could feel her watching, evaluating, waiting for him to complain or ask to slow down. He didn't. He gritted his teeth and matched her stride for stride. They collected 4 martens and 1 fox, their pelts thick with winter growth. Sabine showed him how to reset the traps, explaining the mechanics with efficient precision. Her hands moved with practiced skill, and Jonas watched carefully, memorizing every detail. By the time they returned to the cabin, the sun was fully up, and Jonas's shirt was soaked with sweat despite the cold. Sabine allowed him 10 minutes to catch his breath and drink water, then led him to the woodlot. The work was straightforward, but exhausting. Sabine felled the trees with clean, efficient axe strokes, and Jonas hauled the logs to the cutting area, then worked the crosscut saw to buck them into stove lengths. His shoulders screamed, his hands blistered, and sweat stung his eyes. But he didn't stop, didn't slow, didn't complain. They worked until the sun touched the western peaks, 12 hours of hard labor with only a brief pause at midday for cold biscuits and water. When Sabine finally called a halt, Jonas's entire body throbbed with fatigue. "Tomorrow we do it again," Sabine said, driving her axe into the chopping stump. "And the day after that. This is the easy part, before winter really hits. Think you can handle it?" Jonas straightened, meeting her eyes despite the exhaustion pulling at every muscle. Yes, something flickered across her face. Not approval exactly, but perhaps a lessening of skepticism. "We'll see. Go clean up. Supper in an hour." That night, collapsed in his bedroll, Jonas stared up at the rough-hewn beams of the lean-to and allowed himself a small smile. His body hurt in ways he'd never experienced, and tomorrow would likely be worse. But he'd made it through day 1, and he'd kept his word. No complaints, no excuses, no quit. 1 day down. 6 to go. The pattern repeated for 3 more days. Jonas rose before dawn, worked until dark, fell into his bedroll, barely able to move. The trap lines, the wood cutting, fence repair, hauling water, tending Sabine's small vegetable garden before frost could claim it. The work never stopped, and the pace never slowed. Sabine pushed him hard, testing him in ways both obvious and subtle. She'd set impossible tasks and watched to see if he'd argue. She'd work in silence for hours, then suddenly ask probing questions about his past, his motivations, his plans. She'd send him to handle things alone, giving minimal instruction, seeing if he'd figure it out or come back asking for help. Jonas passed every test. Not because he was naturally gifted at mountain work, he wasn't, not yet, but because he'd learned long ago that determination could compensate for a lot of shortcomings, and pride could carry you through when strength faltered. On the evening of the fourth day, something shifted. They were sitting at the table after supper, and Sabine was mending a leather harness while Jonas cleaned the day's tools. The silence between them had become less hostile, more companionable. "You're tougher than you look," Sabine said abruptly. Jonas glanced up, surprised. It was the closest thing to a compliment she'd offered. "Thank you. Don't let it go to your head. You're still green as spring grass, and you move through the woods like a drunk bear." But there was no real heat in her words. "I'll work on it." Sabine set down the harness, studying him with that direct gaze he was getting used to. "Why do they call you that?" "Virgin Cowboy." Jonas had expected the question eventually. "Because it's true. I've never been with a woman that way." "Why not?" "Not interested?" "Not in the way it's been available to me." He set down the whetstone he'd been using, meeting her eyes. "I've seen what happens when people treat it as casual, as something bought and sold or taken without care. Watched men ruin themselves and the women they touched. Seemed to me it should mean something more than that. Most men don't think that way. Most men don't think much at all. In my experience." Sabine almost smiled. Jonas saw it flicker at the corner of her mouth before she suppressed it. "Fair point." She stood, moving to the window to look out at the darkening mountains. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter, more reflective. "My father raised me to be independent. Said a woman who could stand on her own would never have to settle for less than she deserved. Problem is, standing alone gets to be a habit. Keeps people at a distance even when—" She stopped, shook her head. "Never mind." Jonas waited, sensing something important hovering in the silence. When Sabine didn't continue, he offered his own truth. "I understand that. Being alone is easier than being disappointed. Is that why you came up here? To learn to be alone better?" "No." Jonas considered his words carefully. "I came up here to learn to stand on my own ground. There's a difference. Being alone is about avoiding connection. Standing on your own is about being strong enough to choose connection from a place of wholeness, not need." Sabine turned from the window, and in the firelight, Jonas saw something in her expression he hadn't seen before. A crack in the armor, a glimpse of the person beneath the mountain woman facade. That's a fine philosophy. In order to live it, most worthwhile things are. They looked at each other across the cabin, and something passed between them. Not attraction exactly, not yet, but recognition. Two people who'd chosen difficult paths for similar reasons, finding unexpected resonance in each other's company. Sabine broke the moment first, returning to her chair and picking up the harness. 3 more days. You make it through the week, we'll talk about longer terms. But don't assume anything. Plenty can go wrong in 3 days. "I know." Jonas returned to his tools, but something had changed. The cabin felt different now, the silence less hostile, the space between them less defended. As he headed back to the lean-to that night, Jonas pulled out his father's watch, running his thumb over the frozen hands. 3:47. Time stopped, waiting for something to set it moving again. He had 3 more days to prove himself. But for the first time since he'd ridden up this mountain, Jonas felt like maybe he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The 5th morning brought fog so thick Jonas could barely see 10 feet ahead. It rolled down from the peaks like something alive, muffling sound, and obscuring the familiar landmarks he'd begun to recognize. When Sabine led him out to work on the fence line along the southern boundary, the world felt reduced to just the two of them and the work at hand. The split-rail fence needed significant repair. Several sections had been damaged by falling timber during the autumn storms, and winter would only make the damage worse. Sabine showed Jonas how to dig post holes in the rocky soil, how to set the rails at proper angles for maximum strength, how to use deadfall timber efficiently. Fences matter up here, she explained, tamping earth around a new post. Not just for marking boundaries. They're about defining what's yours, what you're willing to protect. My father built this fence himself, every rail. When he died, I kept it standing. That means something. Jonas worked beside her, his movements becoming more practiced with each passing day. The blisters on his hands had begun to harden into proper calluses. His body was adapting to the altitude and the relentless physical demands. More importantly, he was learning to read the mountain, to notice the signs of changing weather, to move efficiently over difficult terrain, to anticipate what needed doing before being told. "You're from ranch country," Sabine said, as they fitted a new rail into place. "Not a question, an observation, born there. Parents had a small spread south of here, maybe 80 miles. Nothing fancy, but it was ours. What happened to it?" Jonas drove a wedge to secure the rail before answering. "Fever took them both when I was 16. The bank took the land 6 months later. I'd worked alongside my father since I could walk, but I didn't know anything about managing debt or dealing with creditors. By the time I understood what was happening, it was too late." Sabine was quiet for a moment, her hands moving steadily on the fence. "That's hard, losing them and the land both. It taught me that knowing how to work isn't enough. You have to understand the whole picture. The money, the law, the people who'll use your ignorance against you." He met her eyes. "That's part of why I'm here." "I want to understand all of it, not just the labor." "Smart." Sabine moved to the next damage section. "Most people don't think past the immediate work. They forget that keeping land is sometimes harder than claiming it in the first place." They worked in companionable rhythm for another hour before Jonas noticed Sabine favoring her left side. She moved more carefully when reaching for tools, and once he saw her wince when she bent to lift a heavy post. "You're hurt," he said. "It's nothing. Doesn't look like nothing." Sabine straightened, her expression closing off. "I don't need you mothering me." "I'm fine," but she wasn't fine, and over the next hour it became more obvious. She was moving slower, and twice she had to stop to catch her breath. Finally, when she reached for a rail and gasped in pain, Jonas set down his tools. "Show me," he said quietly. "I told you, and I heard you. But if you're hurt bad enough that it's slowing the work, then it affects both of us. Show me." For a moment Jonas thought she'd refuse out of pure stubbornness. Then Sabine's shoulders sagged slightly, and she pulled aside her coat and shirt, enough to reveal a dark bruise spreading across her ribs on the left side. "Happened 2 days ago," she admitted. "I was moving logs and one rolled. Caught me before I could get clear. You've been working like this for 2 days. Work doesn't stop because you're hurting. You learn that quick up here." Jonas felt a surge of frustration mixed with reluctant admiration. "Sabine, you could have cracked ribs. You need to rest it, not haul fence rails." "Can't rest. Winter's coming, and there's too much that needs doing." "Then let me do it." When she started to protest, Jonas held up a hand. "Not because you can't, because right now you shouldn't. Tell me what needs doing and how to do it right, and I'll get it done. You can supervise, make sure I don't mess it up. But you need to let your body heal." Sabine looked at him for a long moment, and Jonas could see the internal struggle playing across her face. Accepting help meant admitting weakness, and for someone who'd built her entire life on self-sufficiency, that didn't come easy. "Fine," she finally said. "But if you do it wrong, I'm fixing it myself, ribs or no ribs." "Fair enough." They adjusted their working arrangement. Sabine directed while Jonas provided the muscle, and to his surprise, she proved to be a good teacher when she wasn't actively demonstrating. She explained not just what to do, but why, sharing the accumulated wisdom of years working this land. By the time they stopped for the midday meal, cold venison and biscuits, Jonas had completed 3 sections of fence to Sabine's exacting standards. They sat on a fallen log, eating in silence, while the fog continued to drift around them. "You could have just left." Sabine said abruptly. "When you saw I was hurt, you could have used it as an excuse to quit. Said you signed on to learn, not to do all the work yourself." Jonas shook his head. "That's not why I'm here. Then why are you here?" "Really?" He thought about how to answer, wanting to get it right. "I spent a lot of years working for other people, doing what I was told, going where I was pointed. It was fine work, honest work, but it never felt like mine. I was just a hired hand, replaceable, temporary. I want something more than that. I want to build something that lasts, on ground that's mine, with skills that can't be taken away. And I figured the best way to learn that was from someone who'd already done it. So you came to learn from me?" "Yes, but not just the practical skills." Jonas gestured at the fence. The mountains shrouded in fog, the harsh beauty of the landscape. "Anyone can teach you to set a fence post or check a trap line. What you've done is different. You've built a life that's completely yours, on your own terms, refusing to compromise even when it would be easier. That takes more than practical skills. That takes something else, something I'm trying to understand." Sabine was quiet for a long time, her eyes distant. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer than he'd heard it. "It's not as noble as you make it sound. Mostly it's just stubbornness. Refusing to let the world tell me I can't do something because I'm a woman. Refusing to need anyone because needing people means they can hurt you. Is that what happened?" "Someone hurts you?" She stood abruptly, gathering the remains of their meal. "We should get back to work." Daylight's burning. Jonas recognized the deflection for what it was, a boundary he'd crossed too quickly. He let it go, returning to the fence work without pressing further. But he'd seen something in Sabine's face, a flash of old pain that explained more than words could about why she'd built these walls around herself. They worked until evening, completing another 4 sections of fence. By the time they returned to the cabin, Jonas's muscles were screaming and his hands were raw, despite the developing calluses. But the fence stood strong, a visible marker of the day's labor. That night, after a quiet supper, Jonas was cleaning tools by the fire when Sabine spoke from her chair where she was mending clothes. "There was a man," she said quietly, 7 years ago. Came up from the valley, said all the right things. Talked about partnership, about building something together. I believed him." She set down her mending, staring into the fire. "Turned out he wanted the land, not me. Wanted to help me manage it, which meant taking over. When I refused, when I made it clear this land was mine and would stay mine, he left. But first he spread stories down in the settlement. Said I was unnatural, cold, impossible to please. Made sure everyone knew the mountain woman couldn't keep a man." Jonas listened without interrupting, sensing she needed to tell this. After that, the other cowboys started coming, every one of them thinking they'd be the one to tame me, to succeed where he'd failed. Like I was a challenge to overcome rather than a person to know. She looked at Jonas then, her eyes hard but honest. "That's why I don't trust easy. That's why I test people hard. Because I learned that most folks see what they want to see, not what's actually there." "I understand," Jonas said simply. "And for what it's worth, I see someone who's built something remarkable through sheer determination. Someone who doesn't need taming because she's not wild. She's free. There's a difference." Sabine held his gaze, something shifting in her expression. "You're different from the others." "I'm starting to see that. I hope so. Don't hope too much. You've still got 2 days to finish your week. Plenty of time for you to disappoint me yet." But there was something different in her tone, not quite warmth, but a lessening of the constant suspicion. Jonas took it as the victory it was. Later, settled in his bedroll in the lean-to, Jonas thought about what Sabine had shared. The betrayal explained so much about her defensive walls, her need to test and push and maintain distance. She'd been hurt by trusting once, and she'd resolved never to make that mistake again. The question was whether Jonas could prove himself different, not through grand gestures or empty promises, but through the steady accumulation of days where his actions matched his words. Through showing up, keeping pace, and not asking her to be anything other than exactly who she was. 2 more days to finish the week. Then they'd see what came next. The sixth day brought the first real snow, not the dusting they'd seen previously, but thick, heavy flakes that obscured the peaks and transformed the landscape into a monochrome study. Jonas woke to find 3 inches already on the ground and more coming down steadily. Sabine was waiting when he emerged from the lean-to, bundled in heavy layers. Snow means different work. We need to check the trap lines before they're buried. Then secure everything that might blow away or get damaged. Move fast and stay close. Easy to get turned around in snow this thick. The trap lines were brutal in the snow. The familiar path was obscured, landmarks hidden, and the cold bit through every layer of clothing. But Sabine moved with confidence, born of years of experience, and Jonas stayed close behind her, learning to read the subtle signs she used for navigation. They collected their catches, fewer than usual, the animals denning up against the storm, and returned to the cabin by early afternoon. The rest of the day was spent in the constant work of winter preparation, securing shutters, checking the roof for weak spots, hauling extra wood close to the cabin, making sure water barrels were filled before they could freeze. By evening, Jonas was exhausted but satisfied. They'd accomplished everything Sabine had wanted done, and the cabin was buttoned up tight against the storm. Supper was hot stew and fresh bread Sabine had made, while Jonas handled the outside work. And the warmth of the fire was a blessed relief after hours in the cold. "Tomorrow's your last day," Sabine said as they finished eating. "The week will be up," Jonas nodded. "I know. You've done better than I expected. Better than any of the others, by a fair margin. Does that mean you'll let me stay on?" Sabine was quiet for a moment, her fingers tracing the grain of the wooden table. "I don't know yet. You've proven you can work, proven you're not going to quit at the first hardship. But staying on means more than just working well. It means being here through the whole winter, maybe longer. Means dealing with isolation that gets heavier as the snow gets deeper. Means seeing me at my worst, because winter up here brings out the worst in people sometimes. You haven't seen that yet. I'd like the chance to." "Why?" She looked at him directly. "You could go back to the valley, work a regular ranch, have easier access to town and other people. Why would you choose this?" Jonas considered his answer carefully. "Because easy isn't what I'm looking for. Because I learn more from you in a day than I'd learn in a month anywhere else. And because," he hesitated, then pushed forward with honesty, "because I like it here. The work feels good, feels meaningful. And the company, despite your best efforts to be difficult, is better than any I've had in years." Sabine almost smiled. "My best efforts to be difficult? You're not exactly welcoming." Never claimed to be, but she was definitely almost smiling now. "Fine, you finish tomorrow strong and we'll talk about winter terms. But I'm warning you now, if you stay, you're in it until spring thaw. No quitting partway through just because you're bored or lonely or tired of me. Agreed, and the pay won't be much. Enough for basics, but you won't get rich working here. Don't need to get rich. Just need to learn and grow." Sabine shook her head, but Jonas could see something in her eyes that looked almost like approval. "You're either the most determined man I've ever met or the most foolish." "Maybe both. Probably both," Jonas agreed. They sat in companionable silence as the fire burned low and the snow continued to fall outside. Jonas felt the weight of the week settling on him, the exhaustion, the satisfaction, the tentative connection forming between him and this difficult, complicated woman who'd built a life in the clouds. One more day. Then he'd know if he'd truly earned his place on this mountain, or if he'd be just another cowboy who couldn't last. But looking at Sabine across the table, seeing the way her defensive walls had begun to crack just slightly, Jonas felt cautiously hopeful. He'd proven he could match her physically. Now he just needed to prove he could match her in all the other ways that mattered, the ways that had nothing to do with strength or endurance, and everything to do with respect, partnership, and the courage to stay when staying was the hardest thing to do. The seventh day dawned clear and cold, the storm having passed in the night. Jonas woke to brilliant sunlight, reflecting off fresh snow. The world transformed into something pristine and almost impossibly beautiful. He could hear Sabine moving around outside, and he dressed quickly, aware that this was his final test. When he emerged from the lean-to, Sabine was shoveling a path from the cabin to the woodshed. She looked up as he approached, and something in her expression told him today would be different. "We're checking the far trap lines," she said. "The ones I haven't taken you to yet. It's a full day's journey, about 15 miles round trip over rough country. We'll need to move fast to make it back before dark." Jonas nodded, understanding the unspoken message. This was the real test, the one that would determine whether he stayed or went. "I'm ready." They set out as the sun climbed above the eastern peaks, both carrying heavy packs with supplies and equipment. The snow made the going treacherous, hiding rocks and deadfall beneath a deceptive blanket of white. Sabine set a punishing pace, and Jonas focused all his energy on keeping up. The trapline took them into country Jonas hadn't seen before, higher, wilder, more remote. They climbed steep switchbacks, where one misstep could mean a deadly fall, crossed frozen streams on logs that rolled treacherously underfoot, and pushed through dense stands of pine where snow cascaded down on them with every brushed branch. Sabine checked each trap with efficient precision, resetting some, collecting catches from others. She worked in near silence, and Jonas sensed she was using the time to think. To make her final decision about whether he'd stay, they stopped for a brief meal around midday, sitting on a windswept ridge with a view that stretched for miles in every direction. The world was white and grey and green, the sky so blue it hurt to look at directly. "My father used to bring me up here," Sabine said, breaking the long silence. "When I was young, before my mother died, he'd point out all the landmarks, teach me how to navigate by the shape of the peaks. This was his favorite place on the mountain." Jonas waited, sensing there was more. "He taught me everything, how to hunt, trap, track, survive. But the most important thing he taught me was that the mountain doesn't care about your intentions or your dreams. It only cares about your actions. You survive by doing, not by wishing or hoping or praying." She looked at Jonas then. "You understand that? I've watched you this week. You don't waste time on talk or excuses. You just do the work. That's how I was raised too, I know. I can see your father in you, in the way you carry yourself. He taught you well." Sabine stood, shouldering her pack. "Come on! Still have half the line to check." They worked their way back down the mountain, as the afternoon light began to slant and golden. Jonas's legs were burning, his shoulders ached from the pack, and his fingers were numb despite his gloves. But he kept pace, driven by determination and by the knowledge that Sabine was watching, evaluating, deciding. They were nearly back to the cabin when Sabine stopped abruptly, her hand going up in a gesture for silence. Jonas froze, following her gaze to a stand of trees 50 yards ahead. A man stood there, leaning against a pine. He was older, maybe 50, with a weather-beaten face and hard eyes. He wore a rancher's coat and had a rifle slung casually over his shoulder. "Sabine," the man said, his voice carrying across the snow. "Been waiting for you. Tom Fletcher." Sabine's voice was flat, carefully neutral. "You're on my land. Just came to talk." Fletcher pushed off from the tree, his hand nowhere near the rifle, but the threat implicit in his presence. "Heard you took on help. Wanted to see for myself. I don't answer to you about my business. Maybe not. But your business becomes my business when you owe money to people I know." Fletcher's eyes slid to Jonas, assessing. "This the virgin cowboy? The one who doesn't drink or gamble? What use is a man like that?" Jonas felt tension coil in his shoulders, but forced himself to remain calm and silent. This wasn't his conversation. "State your purpose or leave," Sabine said coldly, "just bringing a message. Your creditor's getting impatient. 3 months past due on your note, and he's starting to think you're not good for it. He's prepared to be reasonable. Sell him the south 40 acres, and he'll call the debt square. Refuse, and he'll take legal action. You'll lose everything. The land's not for sale." "Sabine, be reasonable." Fletcher's tone became almost cajoling. "You're one woman alone up here. How long can you really hold on? Sell the 40 acres, pay your debt, and you'll still have plenty of land. It's a fair offer. There's nothing fair about pressuring someone over debt. And you can tell your friend that I'll pay what I owe when I'm ready, on my terms, not his." Fletcher's expression hardened. He's done being patient. You've got until the end of the month to sell, or he starts foreclosure proceedings. That's 3 weeks, Sabine. Think hard about what you want to do. He turned to leave, then paused, looking back at Jonas. And you, boy, you might want to find work elsewhere. This mountain woman's about to lose her mountain, and when she does, there won't be any work for hired hands. Just friendly advice? Fletcher walked away into the trees, and Jonas waited until he was completely out of sight before speaking. Who was that? Tom Fletcher. He works for a rancher down in the valley, Marcus Hale. Hale's the one who holds my note. Sabine's jaw was tight, her hands clenched. He's been trying to get his hands on this land for years. Sees it as a stepping stone to the higher ranges. Is what Fletcher said true? About the debt? Sabine started walking again, her pace faster now, almost angry. I borrowed money 2 years ago to buy equipment and supplies after a bad winter. Hale offered the loan at reasonable terms, or so I thought. Turns out the fine print gave him all sorts of ways to call the debt due early. He's been squeezing me for the last 6 months, wanting me to sell rather than pay cash. How much do you owe? $300. Might as well be $3,000. The fur prices have been poor, and I've barely made enough to cover basics. She kicked at the snow in frustration. I won't sell. This land is mine. My father's before me, my grandfather's before him. No Eastern dandy rancher is going to take it because I fell behind on a payment. Jonas was quiet for a moment, thinking. $300 was significant, but not impossible. He had money saved, nearly $200 from years of careful work and modest living. It wasn't enough to cover the whole debt, but it might buy time. I could, he started. No. Sabine cut him off sharply. I know what you're going to offer, and the answer is no. I don't take charity, and I don't need rescuing. I'll figure it out myself. It's not charity. It's nothing. This is my problem, my land, my fight. She stopped, turning to face him with fierce pride in her eyes. I appreciate the thought, Jonas, I do. But if I can't hold this land through my own means, then maybe I don't deserve to hold it, Jonas wanted to argue. To point out that accepting help wasn't the same as weakness, that partnership meant sharing burdens. But he could see in Sabine's face that this wasn't a battle he'd win today. Her pride was too raw, the wound too fresh from Fletcher's visit. They finished the walk to the cabin in tense silence. Once inside, Sabine busied herself with preparing supper, while Jonas tended to the fire and the evening chores. The easy companionship of the previous days felt fractured, replaced by Sabine's obvious stress and frustration. Finally, as they sat down to eat, Jonas spoke carefully. Your week is up. I did what you asked. Now I'm asking you, can I stay on through winter? Sabine looked at him across the table, and Jonas saw the conflict in her face. She wanted to say yes, he could see it. But the debt, the pressure from Fletcher, the uncertainty of her situation, made everything more complicated. I don't know, she finally said. Things are different now. If Hale forecloses, there won't be anything here for either of us. It might be smarter for you to go back to the valley, find work that's more secure. I didn't come here for security. I came here to learn, to grow, to be part of something real. Jonas leaned forward. And I meant what I said. I'm not here to rescue you or fix your problems. But I am here to work alongside you, whatever comes. If you're fighting to keep this land, then I want to be part of that fight. Why? It's not your land, not your legacy, maybe not. But it matters to you, and that's starting to matter to me. The words came out more honest than Jonas had intended. But once said, he didn't take them back. Sabine stared at him for a long moment, something shifting in her expression. You don't know what you're saying. If this goes bad, you could lose everything too. Your time, your wages, your reputation. I know the risks. I'm still asking to stay. She closed her eyes, and Jonas saw the exhaustion in her face, not just from the day's work, but from years of carrying everything alone. When she opened her eyes again, there was a vulnerability there he'd never seen before. If you stay, it's not as hired help anymore. We'd be partners, sharing the work, the risks, the decisions. I can't pay you much, but you'd have equal say in how we handle things, including the debt situation. Jonas felt something settle in his chest, a sense of rightness he'd been chasing for years. Partners. I can work with that, even knowing we might lose it all. Even knowing that. Sometimes the fight matters more than the outcome. Sabine almost smiled. That's a fool's philosophy. Then I guess we're both fools. This time she did smile, small and brief but genuine. I guess we are. She extended her hand across the table. Partners, then. Through winter and whatever comes with it. Jonas clasped her hand, feeling the strength in her grip, the calluses that matched his own. Partners! They shook on it, and in that moment Jonas felt like something fundamental had shifted. He wasn't just a cowboy who'd lasted a week. He was someone Sabine had chosen to trust, to include, to rely on. It was more than he'd hoped for when he'd ridden up this mountain. That evening Jonas moved his gear from the lean-to into the cabin. It wasn't about comfort, though the warmth of the fire was welcome. It was about what it symbolized. He was no longer temporary, no longer on trial. He belonged here, at least for now. After Sabine had gone to bed, her space partitioned off by a curtain she'd hung, Jonas sat by the fire and pulled out his father's pocket watch. The hand still frozen at 3:47. He thought about his father, about the partnership his parents had shared, about the life they'd built together before illness had torn it apart. I think I found something, Pa, he whispered to the silent watch. Something worth building, something worth fighting for. The watch, of course, didn't answer, but sitting there in the warm cabin, with snow falling softly outside, and the knowledge that he'd earned his place here, Jonas felt more at peace than he had in years. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The debt still loomed, Fletcher's threats still hung over them, and winter was just beginning. But for tonight, Jonas let himself feel the simple satisfaction of having stayed when others had quit, of having proven himself worthy of trust that didn't come easy. He'd made it through the week. Now the real work would begin. In the morning, Jonas woke to find Sabine already up, standing at the window with a cup of coffee. She looked tired but resolute, and when she noticed him stirring, she spoke without preamble. I've been thinking about the debt, about Fletcher and Hale and all of it. She turned to face him. I've got a plan, but it's risky. I need your honest opinion. Tell me, there's premium timber on the north section, old-growth pine that would fetch top dollar in the valley. I've been saving it, planning to use it only as a last resort. Well, this is last resort territory. She set down her coffee. If we can cut and haul about 200 board feet before the deep snows hit, and if we can get it to the mill in the valley, we'd have enough to pay off Hale with some left over. But it's hard work, dangerous work, and we'd have to do it fast, Jonas considered. How fast? 3 weeks, maybe less, before Hale's deadline. It means long days, dangerous conditions, and no guarantee we can pull it off. If we fail, we've wasted time and energy we could have used to prepare for winter. And if we succeed, then the land stays ours. The debt gets paid, and we go into winter free and clear. She met his eyes. But I won't do it without your agreement. We're partners now, and this affects both of us. If you think it's too risky, we'll find another way. Jonas thought about his father, about the risks his parents had taken to build their small ranch, about how the biggest regrets in life often came from chances not taken rather than ones that failed. I say we do it, he said. We came this far. Let's see it through. Sabine's shoulders relaxed slightly and she nodded. Then we start tomorrow. Today, we rest and plan. We'll need every advantage we can get. They spent the day going over maps, planning routes, calculating loads and timing. It was the first time Sabine had truly included Jonas in the strategic decisions, and he found himself valued for more than just his muscle. She listened to his suggestions, debated alternatives, and ultimately they crafted a plan together that felt solid. As evening approached and they sat down to a simple meal, Sabine raised her cup of water in a toast. To foolish plans and stubborn partners, Jonas raised his own cup. To fighting for what matters. Their cups met with a soft clink, and in Sabine's eyes, Jonas saw something he'd been hoping for since the day he arrived. Genuine respect, real partnership, and maybe, just maybe, the beginning of something more. The week had ended. The real journey was just beginning. The blizzard hit on the third night after Jonas had officially become Sabine's partner. It came down from the peaks with a fury that seemed almost personal, wind howling around the cabin like a living thing trying to tear it from its foundation. Snow piled against the walls faster than Jonas had thought possible, and within hours, the world beyond the cabin door had disappeared into a white void. They were trapped inside for 3 days. The first day, they busied themselves with indoor work, repairing gear, organizing supplies, sharpening tools. The cabin felt adequate, the forced proximity more awkward than oppressive. But by the second day, with the storm showing no signs of letting up, the space began to feel smaller. Every sound seemed magnified. The creak of floorboards, the scrape of a chair, the constant moan of wind. Sabine grew restless. Jonas could see it in the way she paced the small space, checking and rechecking the window, testing the door against the snow piled beyond it. She was a woman built for action, for the endless work that filled her days, and being confined drove her to distraction. Jonas, by contrast, found a strange peace in the enforced stillness. He'd spent so many years moving from place to place, always working, always busy, that the chance to simply be still felt almost luxurious. He sat by the fire, methodically repairing a leather harness, and watched Sabine prowl the cabin like a caged wolf. "You're going to wear a hole in the floor," he said mildly. Sabine shot him a look. "I don't do well with sitting still," I noticed. She made another circuit of the cabin, then dropped into the chair across from him with visible frustration. "How can you just sit there? Doesn't it drive you mad being stuck inside?" "Not really. I figure the storm will end when it ends. No use fighting what you can't control. That's a very calm way of looking at it. My mother used to say that worry was just suffering you chose to do ahead of time. Better to accept what is and deal with it as it comes." Jonas glanced up from his work. "Though I suspect you're not worried about the storm so much as the time we're losing." Sabine leaned back, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. 3 days of work gone. 3 days closer to Hale's deadline with nothing accomplished. We can't control the weather, but we can control how we use this time. Jonas set aside the harness. "Tell me about the timber we're going after. The more I understand, the better I can help when we get out there." So Sabine talked. She described the north section of her land, the stand of old-growth pines her grandfather had preserved, the terrain they'd need to cross. She explained how to identify the best trees, how to plan the cuts for maximum yield and minimum waste, how to judge when a tree was about to fall and where it would land. Jonas listened intently, asking questions, absorbing every detail. As Sabine talked, he could see her anxiety channeling into something productive. Teaching gave her purpose, and it eased the frustration of confinement. Hours passed. The winter storm lantern, a battered oil lamp that had belonged to Sabine's father, cast warm light across the table between them, creating an island of intimacy in the storm-wrapped cabin. Outside, the world was chaos. Inside, there was only the quiet murmur of voices and the occasional crack from the fire. As evening approached on the second day, they shared a meal of beans and salt pork, supplemented with the last of the fresh bread. The food was simple but satisfying, and the companionship Jonas was coming to realize, even more so. "Why did you never go after what the other cowboys seemed to want?" Sabine asked abruptly. "The drinking, the gambling, the women? Most men your age have tried it all, even if they don't make a habit of it." Jonas considered the question, wanting to answer honestly. "I saw what it did to people. The ranch hands who drank away their pay every Saturday, then spent Sunday sick and broke. The gamblers who lost months of wages in a single night of cards. The men who treated women as something to use and discard, then wondered why they ended up alone, and bitter." He met her eyes. "It all seemed like ways to fill holes that couldn't be filled that way. Like trying to drink when what you really need is food. It might distract you for a while, but it doesn't actually satisfy the hunger." "And what hunger were you trying to satisfy?" "The need to matter, to build something real, something lasting, to be part of something bigger than just surviving day to day." He paused. I watched my parents. They had a partnership, real and deep and honest. They faced everything together. That's what I saw as worth having. Everything else seemed like cheap imitation. Sabine was quiet for a long moment, her eyes distant. That's rare. Most people don't think that deeply about what they want. They just follow the path everyone else is walking. What about you? What made you choose this life? I didn't choose it so much as refuse to give it up. Sabine stood, moving to the window to look out at the wall of white beyond the glass. When my father died, everyone expected me to sell and move to the valley. Find some man to take care of me, live a proper woman's life. The very idea made me sick. This land, this life, it was all I had left of my family, of who I was. Giving it up would have meant giving up myself. So you stayed. So I stayed. And every year since, people have told me I'm being foolish. That I can't sustain it alone. That I should be practical, reasonable, sensible. As if living the life I want is somehow unreasonable. She turned back to face him. I've built something here on my own terms. Maybe it's not what other people would choose, but it's mine. That matters. It does matter. Jonas spoke with conviction. More than most people understand. There's courage in building your own life, even when, especially when, it's not what everyone expects. Sabine studied him in the lamplight, and Jonas felt the weight of her scrutiny. They'd been living and working together for over a week now, but this felt different. The storm had stripped away the buffer of constant work, forced them to actually see each other as more than just partners in labor. You're not what I expected, Sabine said quietly. When you first showed up, I thought you'd be like all the others. But you're not. You actually listen. You don't try to fix me or change me or prove something. You just... She paused, searching for words. You just show up and do the work, no drama, no ego. It's strange. Strange good or strange bad? Strange good. Unsettling, but good. She returned to her chair. I'm not used to being seen as competent, rather than as a problem that needs solving. You're the most competent person I've ever met. Why would I see you as anything else? The simple honesty of his words seemed to catch Sabine off guard. She looked away, something vulnerable flickering across her face before she mastered it. Most men are threatened by capable women. Then most men are fools. Sabine almost smiled. You keep saying things like that, direct, honest things. Like you actually mean them. I do mean them. That's what's unsettling. They sat in companionable silence for a while, the storm raging outside while the fire crackled within. Jonas found himself acutely aware of Sabine's presence across the table, the way the lamplight caught in her dark hair, the strength in her hands as she absently turned her coffee cup, the intelligence in her eyes when she looked at him. He'd come to this mountain to learn skills, to build competence, to prove himself. He hadn't expected to find himself drawn to the woman teaching him. But there it was, undeniable in the quiet of the storm-bound cabin. Tell me about your parents, Sabine said, breaking the silence. You said they had a real partnership. What was that like? Jonas leaned back, memory softening his features. They worked side by side in everything. My father consulted my mother on every major decision, where to graze the cattle, when to sell, how to manage money. She wasn't just his wife. She was his partner in the truest sense. They disagreed sometimes, argued even, but there was always respect underneath it. That sounds rare. It was. Still is, I think. Jonas stared into the fire. When they got sick, they faced that together too. My mother went first, and I saw the light go out of my father. He lasted another 3 days, but I think he was just waiting to follow her. They were that connected. That's beautiful, Sabine said softly. And terrible. To love someone that much, to be that vulnerable to loss. Is it better to never love like that? To stay safe but alone? The question hung in the air between them, laden with meaning neither was quite ready to address directly. Sabine looked at him for a long moment, something shifting in her expression. I don't know, she finally said. I thought I did once. Now I'm not so sure. The third day of the storm brought an unexpected shift in mood. The oppressive tension of confinement had given way to something softer, more comfortable. They moved around the cabin with easy familiarity. Working on separate tasks but together in the space, Sabine was reorganizing her supply shelves when she pulled down an old wooden box Jonas hadn't noticed before. She opened it carefully, and he caught a glimpse of papers inside, handwritten pages covered in feminine script. "My mother's recipe book," Sabine said, noticing his attention. "One of the few things I have from her. May I see?" Sabine hesitated, then handed him the book. Jonas turned the pages carefully, reading the neat handwriting that documented meals and memories. There were recipes for things practical, breads, stews, preserved meats, but also things more refined, cakes, pastries, dishes that spoke of a life less austere than the one Sabine now lived. "She was from Philadelphia originally," Sabine said. "Came west with my father after they married. She was educated, refined, used to a comfortable life. But she gave it all up to be with him, to build this life in the mountains. Do you ever make these?" Jonas tapped a recipe for apple cake. "No, haven't had the ingredients or the time." "And truthfully," Sabine paused, "it hurt too much to try. Like I'd be reaching for a life I can't have, shouldn't want." Jonas handed the book back carefully. "Maybe someday, when the debt's paid and things are easier, you could reclaim that part of her, of yourself, maybe." But Sabine's voice was doubtful. "I'm not that person anymore. I'm the mountain woman, the one who traps and logs and works like a man. There's no room for cakes and refined things. Why not? Who says you can't be both?" The question seemed to startle Sabine. She stood holding her mother's book, staring at Jonas, as if he'd suggested something revolutionary. "I never thought. People don't see me that way. As someone who could be both. Then people aren't looking properly." Before Sabine could respond, they heard a change in the wind. The constant howl that had been their companion for 3 days suddenly lessened, and sunlight, actual sunlight, broke through the window in a shaft of gold. The storm was breaking. They pulled on coats and forced open the door, which required both of them pushing against the weight of snow piled behind it. When they finally got it open, they stepped out into a transformed world. Snow lay 4 feet deep in places, sculpted into fantastic drifts by the wind. The sky was clearing rapidly, patches of brilliant blue showing between scattering clouds. The air was so cold it hurt to breathe, but after 3 days inside, it felt glorious. "We lost 3 days," Sabine said, surveying the snow. "We'll have to work twice as hard to make up the time." "Then that's what we'll do." Jonas looked at her, standing in the snow with her face turned up to the emerging sun, and felt something shift in his chest. Not just respect or admiration, but something deeper. Something that felt dangerous and necessary all at once. If Sabine noticed his attention, she didn't acknowledge it. She was already planning, calculating, preparing for the work ahead. But as they stood there in the aftermath of the storm, Jonas felt the truth settle into his bones. He wasn't just fighting for land or for skills anymore. He was fighting for this, for the partnership, for the woman, for the possibility of building something real together. The question was whether Sabine would ever let herself want the same thing, whether she could risk lowering the walls she'd built so carefully, so necessarily, around her heart. Only time would tell. But Jonas had proven he could be patient. He'd wait as long as it took, work as hard as necessary, and hope that eventually Sabine would see what he already knew, that some things were worth the risk. Some people were worth staying for, and some partnerships could become something more, if both people were brave enough to let them. The work after the storm was brutal. Jonas and Sabine spent 2 days just clearing paths and digging out essential areas, before they could even think about starting on the timber operation. The snow complicated everything, making the journey to the north section treacherous and the work itself twice as difficult. But they pushed forward with grim determination, both aware of the deadline ticking down. 2 weeks left before Hale could move to foreclose. 2 weeks to cut, haul, and sell enough timber to pay off $300 in debt. On the 3rd day after the storm, while Jonas was organizing tools in the storage shed, he found something unexpected, an old map, hand-drawn and carefully preserved between sheets of oilcloth. He carried it to the cabin where Sabine was preparing their midday meal. "What's this?" he asked, spreading it on the table. Sabine glanced over, then froze. She set down the knife she'd been using and came to the table, her expression shifting from surprise to something more complicated. "That's my grandfather's map. I'd forgotten it was out there." She traced the lines with one finger. "He drew this when he first claimed the land, marking every notable feature, every resource, every boundary." Jonas studied the map more carefully. It showed the full extent of the Cross family holdings, marked with notations in a careful hand. But what caught his attention were the areas marked with special symbols, circles, crosses, notations about timber quality and possible mineral deposits. What are these marks? He pointed to a series of circles in the northern quadrant. Grandfather thought there might be mineral deposits there. He was a miner before he became a rancher, knew how to read the land, but he never developed it. Said the timber and trapping were enough for his lifetime, and his children could decide about the rest. "Did your father ever investigate?" "No, he was content with what he had. And I've been too busy surviving to think about prospecting." Sabine looked at the map with new eyes. "Why do you ask?" Jonas pointed to another notation. "Because this shows premium timber stands in 3 locations, not just the one you mentioned. And if these mineral deposits are real, this land is worth far more than anyone realizes." He met her eyes. "Including Marcus Hale." Understanding dawned on Sabine's face, followed quickly by anger. "That's why he's been so aggressive about the debt. Why Fletcher showed up making threats. They know about this map, or at least suspect what's here. They don't just want the land, they want what's under it. That would be my guess." Sabine sat down heavily, staring at the map that suddenly represented not just her heritage, but the target on her back. "If they know the land's value, they'll never stop pressuring me. Even if we pay off this debt, they'll find other ways to come after it. Then we need to make sure you have an unassailable claim. And we need to move fast on the timber before they can interfere." Jonas studied the map more carefully. "This shows 3 stands of premium timber. If we can harvest from all 3 instead of just the one, we could pay off the debt and have enough left over to hire a good lawyer. Maybe even invest in proper surveys to document the mineral rights. That's 3 times the work in the same amount of time." "I know, but it might be the only way to truly secure your position." Sabine looked at him, and Jonas saw the calculation in her eyes, weighing risk against reward, difficulty against necessity. Finally she nodded. "You're right. If we're going to do this, we should do it properly. All 3 stands, full documentation, leave no doubt about what we hold and how we're using it." They spent the afternoon revising their plans, using the map to plot routes and strategies. The work would be even harder than they'd anticipated, the timeline even tighter. But there was a fierce determination in Sabine's expression that told Jonas she was ready for the fight. Over the next week, they pushed themselves to the limit. Up before dawn, they'd make the trek to the timber stands, work until their hands bled and their muscles screamed, then haul loads back through deep snow before darkness fell. They worked in near silence, conserving energy for the labor, moving with practiced coordination that came from their growing partnership. Jonas learned more in those days than in all his previous years of ranch work. He learned how to read a tree's lean, how to plan a cut to drop it exactly where needed, how to strip branches efficiently and judge board feet by eye. More than that, he learned to read Sabine, to know when she needed help without asking, when to push and when to step back, how to work alongside someone so completely that words became unnecessary. They were working the second timber stand when Jonas noticed they were being watched. He caught movement in the tree line, too deliberate to be an animal, too careful to be innocent. He continued working but moved closer to Sabine, speaking quietly. "We're not alone. Tree line about 40 yards northeast." Sabine didn't look up from her work, but her posture shifted slightly, more alert. "How many?" "Can't tell. At least 2. They continued working, both acutely aware of the watchers in the trees. After about 20 minutes, the observers withdrew, and Jonas finally relaxed slightly. "Fletcher's men," Sabine said flatly. "Hale's keeping tabs on us, seeing what we're doing. Does that worry you?" "Should. They know we're cutting timber, which means they know we're planning to pay the debt. They might try to interfere, damage the timber, spook buyers, create problems at the mill. She drove her axe into a log with more force than necessary. Or worse. Sabine met his eyes. Make it look like an accident. Falling tree, broken rope, wrong step on a cliff edge. Easy enough to arrange in country like this, hard to prove it was anything but bad luck. The casual way she said it chilled Jonas more than the explicit threat. Has anyone tried before? Once, 2 years ago, when I first refused to sell to Hale. Had a tree nearly fall on me that shouldn't have. Could have been accident, could have been sabotage. I made sure people in the settlement knew I suspected the latter, and it stopped. But now the stakes are higher. Jonas thought about that as they returned to work. The danger had been abstract before. Financial pressure, legal threats. But this was different. This was physical harm, real danger to both of them. And yet Sabine faced it with the same steady determination she brought to everything else. That evening, they were hauling their last load of the day when disaster struck. Jonas was leading, testing the path ahead, when he heard Sabine cry out behind him. He spun around to see her falling, the rope she'd been using to steady herself snapping free. Her body sliding toward a steep drop-off. Jonas moved without thinking, lunging forward and catching her arm just as she went over the edge. The momentum pulled them both forward, and for a terrible moment Jonas thought they'd both go over. But he managed to hook his foot behind a tree root, and they stopped hard, both of them hanging on the edge of a 30-foot drop onto rocks below. "I've got you," Jonas gasped, his grip on her arm iron tight despite the strain. "Don't let go." "The rope," Sabine said, her voice strained but steady. "It was cut. I saw the fibers. Clean slice, not frayed." Jonas's blood ran cold, but he focused on the immediate problem. "Can you reach that ledge with your foot?" "About 2 feet to your left." Sabine tested, found the ledge, and used it to take some weight off Jonas's straining arm. Together, they worked their way back up, Jonas pulling while Sabine climbed. When they finally collapsed on solid ground, both were shaking from adrenaline and exertion. "You saved my life," Sabine said, her voice unsteady. "If you hadn't been right there, but I was." Jonas checked her over for injuries, his hands gentle but thorough. "Are you hurt?" "Bruised, scared, angry, but whole." She looked at him, and Jonas saw something in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Vulnerability, yes, but also something warmer. "Thank you. We're partners. Partners protect each other." Sabine reached out, her hand finding his and squeezing hard. They sat there in the snow, hands clasped, both shaken by how close they'd come to disaster. "The rope was sabotaged," Sabine said finally, "which means someone came here while we were working, knew where to look, knew we'd be using that path. They're watching closer than I thought. Then we need to be more careful. Work together, never separate, watch our backs, and move faster. If they're willing to try something this direct, they must be worried we'll succeed. Which means we're on the right track." Sabine stood, pulling Jonas up with her. "Come on. We need to get back to the cabin before dark, and we should vary our route in case they're waiting on the usual path." They made their way back carefully, taking a longer but safer route. Jonas's mind was racing, calculating risks and planning countermeasures. The work had just become exponentially more dangerous. But backing down now wasn't an option, not for him, and certainly not for Sabine. That night, back in the cabin, they conducted a thorough inventory of all their equipment, checking ropes, tools, and supplies for any signs of tampering. Everything seemed secure, but the violation of knowing someone had been close enough to sabotage them left them both on edge. "You could leave," Sabine said quietly as they finished their inspection. "This isn't your fight. You don't owe me this kind of risk." Jonas looked at her across the cabin, this strong, stubborn woman who'd let him into her life against all her instincts. "I'm not leaving. We're in this together now, whatever comes." "Jonas, no!" He moved closer, wanting her to hear him clearly. "You asked me once why I came up here. The truth is, I was looking for something I couldn't name, a place to belong, a purpose that mattered, a partnership that was real. I found all of that. I'm not walking away because someone tried to scare us off. That just proves we're doing something worth fighting for." Sabine stared at him for a long moment, emotions flickering across her face too fast to name. Finally she nodded. "All right. Together then. But we're smart about it. No unnecessary risks, constant vigilance, and we have each other's backs every moment." "Agreed." She extended her hand and Jonas took it. But this time, instead of just shaking, Sabine held on, her thumb brushing across his knuckles in a gesture that felt almost tender. "I'm not good at this," she said quietly. "At trusting people, at letting them matter. It scares me more than falling off cliffs or facing down Hale's men." "I know. It scares me too. But some things are worth being scared for." Sabine's hand tightened on his. "Don't die on me, Jonas Calder. Don't make me regret letting you stay." "I won't. And the same goes for you. You be careful out there. Because if something happened to you—" He stopped, the emotion too raw to voice completely. "I know," Sabine said softly. "I know." They stood there in the lamplight, hands clasped, both aware they'd crossed some invisible line. What had started as a working partnership was becoming something deeper, more complicated, infinitely more precious, and infinitely more dangerous. Because now they both had something to lose. The next morning brought renewed determination. They worked the timber stands with fierce efficiency, taking turns on watch while the other worked. The sense of being observed never left them, but no further sabotage appeared. Perhaps the failed attempt had made their enemies more cautious, or perhaps they were planning something else. Either way, Jonas and Sabine pushed forward. Day by day, the stacks of cut timber grew. They documented everything meticulously, which stands they'd cut from, how much, the quality. Evidence that they were legitimate users of their own land, not squatters or claim jumpers. One evening, 10 days into the work, they sat by the fire calculating progress. The news was both good and concerning. "We've got enough timber cut," Sabine said, reviewing her figures. "Maybe even a bit more than we need. But hauling it to the valley and getting it to the mill, that's going to take at least 4 days, maybe 5. And we've only got 6 days before Hale's deadline. Tight, but possible, if nothing goes wrong." Sabine looked at him. "And we both know Hale won't let us walk this timber down to the mill without trying something." Jonas thought about that. "Then we need help. People we can trust. Is there anyone in the settlement who'd side with us over Hale?" Sabine considered. "Maybe. Bill Hutchins at the general store. He knew my father, always treated me fair. There's a few others who don't love Hale's way of doing business. But asking for help isn't weakness. It's strategy. We need eyes on the trail, witnesses if Hale tries anything illegal. We need people who'll stand with us." Sabine was quiet for a long moment, wrestling with her pride and her practical sense. Finally she nodded. "All right. Tomorrow one of us goes to the settlement, talks to Hutchins and a few others. The other stays here, guards the timber. I'll go," Jonas offered. "You know this land better. You're more equipped to handle any trouble here. And I can be persuasive when I need to be, can you now? I convinced you to let me stay, didn't I?" Sabine almost smiled. "Fair point. All right, you go to the settlement. But Jonas, be careful. Hale has people everywhere, and if they realize we're organizing resistance, they might get desperate." "I will. And you, don't take any chances while I'm gone. If trouble comes, you hide the timber and save yourself. No heroics. Can't promise that." Sabine, she reached out and touched his face, the gesture so unexpected and tender that Jonas froze. "I know. I'll be careful. We both will. Because we're going to win this, Jonas. We're going to save this land, and then—" She stopped, dropping her hand. "And then?" Jonas prompted gently. "And then we'll see what comes next. Together." It was the closest thing to a promise either of them had made, and it settled into Jonas's chest like warmth on a cold day. Together. Whatever that meant, whatever it became, they'd face it together. The next morning, Jonas saddled Temperance and rode down the mountain toward the settlement, carrying with him the hope that they could find allies in this fight. Behind him, Sabine stood in front of the cabin, watching him go with an expression that told him everything he needed to know. She was scared, not of Hale or his men, but of what she was starting to feel, of what it would mean if Jonas didn't come back. of the walls she'd built so carefully beginning to crumble. Jonas understood, because he felt the same way. But fear, he'd learned, was just the price of caring about something real. And what he and Sabine were building, what they were fighting for, was as real as it got. He'd find help in the settlement. He'd bring back allies. And together they'd face down Hale and anyone else who tried to take what was theirs. Because some things were worth fighting for. Some people were worth the risk. And some partnerships were worth whatever it took to protect them. Jonas reached the settlement by mid-afternoon, his horse breathing hard from the descent through deep snow. The cluster of buildings looked smaller and more desolate than he remembered, smoke rising from a few chimneys into the grey winter sky. He headed straight for Hutchins's general store, the most substantial building in the settlement. Bill Hutchins was behind the counter when Jonas entered, sorting through a ledger. The older man looked up, his weathered face creasing into a cautious smile. Jonas Calder. Heard you were still up at the Cross place. That makes you either brave or foolish. Maybe both, Jonas said, stomping snow from his boots. Mr. Hutchins, I need to talk to you about Sabine and Marcus Hale. Hutchins' expression turned serious. He glanced around the empty store, then gestured Jonas to follow him to the back room. Once they were away from any potential eavesdroppers, he leaned against a barrel of flour and crossed his arms. Say your piece. Jonas explained everything. The debt, the deadline, the timber operation, the sabotaged rope. Hutchins listened without interrupting, his face growing progressively grimmer. Hale's been circling that land for years, Hutchins finally said. Ever since Samuel Cross died and Sabine inherited. He knows there's value up there beyond what most folks see. Minerals, most likely. Maybe water rights, too. He's the kind of man who sees opportunity where others see wilderness. We're planning to haul the timber down in 4 days, sell it at the mill, and pay off the debt before the deadline. But we think Hale might try to interfere. We need witnesses, people who'll make it harder for him to act outside the law. Hutchins was quiet for a moment, clearly weighing risks. Hale's got influence here. Most folks owe him something. Credit at his bank, jobs on his ranch, favors of one kind or another. Standing against him could cost people, I know. But there are times when doing nothing costs more. Spoken like a young man who hasn't learned the price of idealism yet. But Hutchins's tone wasn't unkind. Still, you're right. Hale's been pushing too far for too long. Someone needs to push back. I'll talk to a few people, folks who don't owe Hale or who are tired of his way of doing business. Can't promise much, but I'll see what I can do. Thank you. That's all we're asking. Jonas left the store and spent the next hour carefully visiting other businesses and homes, feeling out sympathies, making quiet requests. He found more support than he'd expected. It seemed Hale had made enemies through years of aggressive dealing. But he also found fear. People who sympathized but wouldn't act, who wished Sabine well but couldn't risk their own livelihoods. He was heading back to his horse when he noticed a man watching him from across the muddy street. The man was well dressed for the settlement, with a fine coat and polished boots. He approached Jonas with the confidence of someone used to being obeyed. "You're Jonas Calder," the man said. "Not a question. I am. Marcus Hale. I think we should talk." Jonas studied the man who'd been threatening Sabine's livelihood. Hale was perhaps 50, with iron-grey hair and sharp eyes that calculated and assessed. There was intelligence in his face and a hardness that spoke of a man who got what he wanted through whatever means necessary. "I don't think we have anything to discuss," Jonas said evenly. "On the contrary, I think we have a great deal to discuss. Walk with me?" It wasn't really a request. Hale started walking, and after a moment's hesitation, Jonas followed. They headed toward the edge of the settlement, where they could talk without being overheard. "You're working for Sabine Cross," Hale said. "Helping her with this timber operation. I'm her partner, not her hired hand." "Partner," Hale smiled thinly. "Interesting. And as her partner, do you understand the situation she's in? I understand she owes you money, and you're trying to take her land. It's not that simple. Miss Cross is in over her head. She's been barely scraping by for years, and eventually reality catches up. I've actually been quite generous, extending credit, giving her time. But there are limits to generosity, especially when you want what she has. Hale's expression didn't change. I'm a businessman, Mr. Calder. I see opportunities and I pursue them. That land has potential. Potential that's wasted on one woman trying to live like her grandfather did. With proper development, it could support a dozen families, generate real wealth. For you, for everyone involved, including Miss Cross, if she'd be reasonable. I've offered to buy her out at fair price, more than fair considering her debt situation. She'd have enough to start fresh somewhere more suitable. She doesn't want to start fresh somewhere else. She wants to keep what's hers. Hale stopped walking, turning to face Jonas directly. And that's where you come in, isn't it? The young idealist, filling her head with notions about fighting back, about paying off the debt through this timber scheme. It's romantic, I'll give you that. But it's also foolish. We'll see about that. No, Mr. Calder, you won't, because I'm going to make you an offer. And I suggest you take it seriously. Hale's voice dropped, becoming almost conversational. Leave, go back to the valley, find work on another ranch. I'll give you $200, more than you'd make in 6 months of honest work. All you have to do is walk away from Sabine Cross and this doomed crusade of hers. Jonas felt cold settle in his stomach. You're trying to bribe me to abandon my partner. I'm offering you a way out before things become unpleasant. Because they will become unpleasant, Mr. Calder. I have resources, influence, patience. I will get that land one way or another. The only question is, how much collateral damage occurs along the way? You could save yourself and, frankly, save Miss Cross a lot of pain by simply stepping aside. Or what? You'll arrange another accident? Maybe one that works this time? Hale's eyes narrowed. I don't know what you're implying, but I'd be careful about making accusations you can't prove. Accidents happen in the mountains. People die. It would be tragic if something happened to you or Miss Cross, but it wouldn't be particularly surprising. The threat was clear, even wrapped in careful language. Jonas felt anger rise in his chest, but kept his voice level. I'm not leaving, and neither is Sabine. We're going to pay off that debt, and then you're going to leave her alone. Noble, foolish, but noble. Hale straightened his coat. Very well. You've made your choice. Just remember, when things fall apart, and they will, you had a chance to walk away. What comes next is on you. Hale turned and walked back toward the center of the settlement, leaving Jonas standing in the cold. The encounter had shaken him more than he wanted to admit. Hale wasn't just greedy, he was dangerous, and he was certain he'd win. That kind of confidence usually came from having cards others didn't know about. Jonas spent another hour in the settlement, but the encounter with Hale had left him uneasy. He gathered what promises of support he could, then headed back up the mountain as the sun began its descent toward the western peaks. He found Sabine in the cabin, pacing with an energy that spoke of barely contained agitation. She turned when he entered, relief flooding her face before she mastered it. You're back. I was starting to worry. I'm fine. Got some support lined up. Hutchins and a few others will help. But Sabine, I ran into Hale. Her expression hardened. What did he want? Jonas described the encounter, including the bribe attempt and the veiled threats. Sabine listened with growing tension, her hands clenching and unclenching at her sides. $200, she said when he finished. He offered you $200 to abandon me. That's more than I owe him. I didn't take it. I know you didn't. But the fact that he made the offer. She moved to the window, staring out at the darkening mountains. He's more worried than I thought. If he's trying to split us up, it means he thinks we might actually succeed, or it means he's planning something and wants me out of the way first. Sabine turned back to face him. Jonas, maybe you should... Don't, he cut her off firmly. Don't suggest I leave. I'm not going anywhere. We're in this together, remember? Even when it means Hale's threats? Even when it could cost you everything? Especially then. Sabine looked at him for a long moment, emotions warring in her face. Then she crossed the cabin and did something Jonas hadn't expected. She embraced him, her arms coming around him tight and fierce. Jonas froze for a heartbeat, then returned the embrace, feeling the tension in her body, the fear she wouldn't voice aloud. They stood like that for a long moment, drawing strength from each other. I'm scared, Sabine admitted quietly, her voice muffled against his shoulder. "Not of losing the land, though that terrifies me too, but of losing you, of getting you killed because of my stubborn pride. It's not pride, it's principle, and I'm here by choice." Jonas pulled back enough to see her face. "Besides, I'm not that easy to kill. Hale will find that out if he tries." Sabine almost smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. She stepped back, composing herself. "All right, we stick to the plan. 4 more days, then we haul the timber down and end this." 4 more days, Jonas agreed. But that night, lying in his bedroll by the fire, Jonas couldn't shake the unease Hale's confidence had planted. The man had been too certain, too calm, like he knew something they didn't, like their plan was already doomed and he was just waiting for them to figure it out. Jonas pushed the thought away and tried to sleep. But it lingered at the edges of his consciousness like a shadow. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor, Tom Fletcher, looking nervous in a way Jonas hadn't seen before. Sabine met him at the cabin door with Jonas at her shoulder, both of them wary. "I need to talk to you," Fletcher said without preamble. "Both of you. It's important. Say your piece and get off my land," Sabine replied coldly. Fletcher glanced around as if checking for watchers, then spoke quickly and quietly. "There's something you need to know about your land, about your claim to it." Hale's been doing research, digging through old territorial records. "He found something." "Found what?" Jonas asked, tension coiling in his gut. "Your father's original claim," Fletcher said, looking at Sabine. "It was provisional, conditioned on specific requirements being met within a certain time frame." "What requirements?" "Marriage and producing an heir, or showing continuous improvement and male ownership. Old law from territorial days meant to encourage settlement. Your grandfather met it. He was married, had your father. Your father would have met it too, but he died before I married," Sabine finished, her face draining of color. "Which means, as an unmarried woman, your claim is legally questionable," Fletcher confirmed. "Hale's lawyers have been building a case that the original conditions weren't met, which means the claim reverted to available territory. Hale's been quietly filing papers to claim it himself." Jonas felt the floor drop out from under him. This was the card Hale had been holding, the reason for his confidence. Even if they paid the debt, even if they fought him off legally, he could challenge Sabine's fundamental right to the land itself. "Why are you telling us this?" Sabine asked, her voice hollow. Fletcher looked uncomfortable. "Because I've been working for Hale for 5 years, and I've watched him destroy good people for profit. I told myself it was just business, that it wasn't personal. But what he's planning to do to you, using laws meant to protect settlers to steal from one, it's not right. You deserve to know what you're up against. What I'm up against is that I have no legal claim to land 3 generations of my family have worked." Sabine's voice was bitter. "Everything my grandfather built, my father preserved, that I fought to keep, it was all built on sand." Jonas's mind was racing, looking for angles, for solutions. "There has to be a way to fight this. Challenge the application of those old laws, or what?" Sabine turned to him, and Jonas saw devastation in her eyes. "Get married? To who? You? Trap you in a legal marriage just to save my land?" The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implications neither had been ready to voice. Fletcher cleared his throat. "I should go. I've said what I came to say. Whatever you decide, good luck. You'll need it." He left, and Jonas and Sabine stood in the cabin, the revelation hanging between them like a wall. Everything had changed. The debt had been a problem they could solve through work and determination. But this was different. This struck at the foundation of everything Sabine was, everything she'd believed she had. "This is what he meant," Jonas said quietly. "When Hale said things would fall apart, he knew we'd eventually discover this. He's been playing a longer game all along, and now he wins." Sabine moved to the table, sinking into a chair. "Even if we pay the debt, even if we fight him, he can still take the land through legal channels. My only option is to marry or lose everything." "Then marry." Sabine looked at him sharply. "You'd just marry me?" Jonas moved to kneel beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "I know it's not how either of us would have chosen it. I know it feels like we're being forced, but Sabine, I came here looking for partnership, for something real to build. I found that with you. This isn't the proposal I would have planned, and the timing is terrible, but the offer is genuine. Marry me, not just to save the land, but because I want to face whatever comes next with you. Sabine stared at him, tears beginning to track down her cheeks. Jonas, I can't ask this of you. Tying yourself to me legally, taking on all my problems, all for a piece of land that might not even... It's not about the land. It's about you. Jonas squeezed her hands. These last weeks, working alongside you, learning from you, seeing who you really are. I've fallen in love with you, Sabine Cross. I didn't plan it, didn't expect it. But there it is. So yes, the marriage would serve a legal purpose, but it would also be true. I love you, and I want to build a life with you, whatever form that takes. Sabine was crying now, the tears falling freely. You're either the bravest man I've ever met or the biggest fool. We've established it's probably both. She laughed, a broken sound that was half sob. I don't deserve you. I don't deserve this kind of loyalty, this kind of love. Say it, Sabine. This kind of love. Because that's what it is, whether we planned for it or not. Sabine pulled her hands free and stood, pacing to the window. Jonas waited, giving her time to process, to decide. His heart was pounding, laid bare in a way he'd never experienced before. He'd meant every word. The marriage would solve their legal problem, yes, but it would also be real. The feelings he'd developed for this strong, stubborn, remarkable woman were as real as anything he'd ever known. Finally, Sabine turned back to him. If we do this, it has to be honest, not just a legal arrangement. I won't trap you in a marriage of convenience when you've offered something genuine. I'm not trapped if I'm choosing it freely. And you are. Choosing freely? Not just because you're noble or because you feel obligated after everything. Jonas stood, crossing to where she stood. I'm choosing freely. I'm choosing you. The land, the fight with Hale, all of it, that's just context. The core truth is that I love you, and I want to spend my life with you. Marriage would give us the legal standing to fight Hale, yes. But more than that, it would give us each other. Partners in every sense. That's what I'm choosing. Sabine reached up, cupping his face with her work-roughened hands. I'm not good at this. At being vulnerable, at trusting, at letting someone matter this much. You deserve someone easier, someone softer, someone I deserve you and you deserve me. We deserve each other. The good and the difficult and everything in between. Jonas covered her hands with his. So what do you say, Sabine Cross? Will you marry me? She looked at him for a long moment, searching his face for any sign of doubt or regret. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her because she finally nodded. Yes, I'll marry you, Jonas Calder. For the land, for the law, for the fight. But mostly because somewhere in these last weeks, I fell in love with you too. And I'm tired of fighting that truth. Jonas pulled her close, kissing her forehead, her cheeks, finally her lips. A kiss that tasted of salt from her tears and held all the promise of a future they'd chosen together despite impossible odds. When they finally pulled apart, Sabine rested her forehead against his. We're going to have to do this fast. Get married before Hale can move on his claim, then use that marriage to challenge his legal position. We'll ride down to the settlement tomorrow. Get the paperwork started. Find someone to perform the ceremony. Then we finish the timber operation and pay off that debt. Show Hale that we're not just fighting with legal technicalities. We're fighting with everything we have. Together, Sabine said softly. Together, Jonas agreed. They spent the rest of the evening planning, their voices low and intense in the lamplight. But beneath the practical discussions of timing and legalities ran a current of something deeper, the knowledge that they'd crossed a threshold, that what had begun as a working arrangement had become something far more significant. Later, as Jonas lay by the fire, he pulled out his father's pocket watch. 3:47, time still frozen. He thought about his parents, about the partnership they'd shared, about how his father had looked at his mother with complete devotion. I found it, Pa. He whispered to the silent watch. Found what you and Ma had. Found someone worth staying for, worth fighting for, worth building a life with. The watch didn't answer, but Jonas felt a sense of peace settle over him anyway. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new battles. But tonight he had Sabine's yes, had the promise of a future they'd forged together. Whatever came next, they'd face it as partners, as husband and wife, as two people who'd chosen each other despite every obstacle. Or maybe because of them. Some things were worth fighting for. Some people were worth any risk. And some marriages, even ones born of necessity, could become the foundation for everything that mattered. Dawn came cold and clear, and with it, a new sense of purpose. Jonas woke to find Sabine already dressed, standing by the window with a cup of coffee in her hands. The morning light caught the silver threads in her dark hair, and Jonas felt his heart constrict with the weight of what they were about to undertake. "Second thoughts?" he asked quietly, sitting up. Sabine turned, and the look in her eyes was clear and certain. "No, you?" "None." She crossed to where he sat and handed him a small object, her mother's empty wedding ring box, the velvet worn soft with age. "I found this last night. Been empty since my mother died. I thought, if we're doing this, if we're really doing this, it should mean something, not just papers and legal words." Jonas opened the box carefully, seeing the faded satin lining, the space where rings had once rested. "I don't have a ring to give you. Not a proper one. I don't need proper. I need real." Jonas thought for a moment, then pulled out his pocket knife. "Give me an hour. I have an idea." While Sabine prepared breakfast and organized their gear for the journey to the settlement, Jonas went out to the woodshed. He found a piece of mountain oak, close-grained and strong, and began to work. His father had taught him basic carving as a boy, and though Jonas was no craftsman, his hands remembered the motions. He worked carefully, shaping a simple ring from the oak. It wasn't elegant or refined, the wood was rough in places, the circle not perfectly round. But it was honest work, done with care, and it would serve. When he'd sanded it as smooth as he could manage with the tools at hand, he brought it back inside. Sabine was waiting, and when he showed her the wooden ring, something shifted in her expression. She took it from him, turning it in her fingers, and Jonas saw tears shine in her eyes before she blinked them away. "It's perfect," she said quietly. "It's us, imperfect, rough around the edges, but solid, real. I'll get you a proper gold ring when we can afford it. When the debt's paid and we have breathing room. I don't want a gold ring. I want this one." She slipped it on her finger. It fit reasonably well, needing only minor adjustment. "This is what matters, Jonas, not gold or diamonds or anything fancy. This, made by your hands from this mountain for me. This is what I want." They stood there for a moment, hands clasped around the simple wooden ring, both of them understanding the symbolism. They were choosing each other, choosing this life, choosing to fight for what they believed in, rather than what was easy or expected. "We should go," Sabine finally said. "The sooner we get to the settlement, the sooner we can make this official." They rode down together, Jonas on Temperance and Sabine on her sturdy mountain horse. The descent was treacherous with snow and ice, but they took it carefully, both aware that accidents now would be more than inconvenient. They'd be disastrous. The settlement was quiet when they arrived, most people going about the business of surviving another winter day. Jonas and Sabine headed first to Bill Hutchins's store, where they'd arranged to meet him the previous day. Hutchins listened to their plan with growing concern and grudging respect. "You're really doing this? Getting married to secure the land claim?" "We're getting married because we want to," Jonas corrected. "The legal benefit is secondary." Hutchins looked between them, and something in his weathered face softened. "Samuel would be proud, Sabine. Your father always wanted you to find someone who saw you for who you really are. Looks like you did." "We need it done quickly," Sabine said. "Today, if possible. And we need witnesses. People who can testify to the legitimacy of the marriage. If Hale challenges it..." "The circuit judge won't be through here for another month," Hutchins said. "But the town clerk can file the paperwork, and Reverend Williams can perform the ceremony if he's willing. Let me make some inquiries. While Hutchins went to find the Reverend and gather witnesses, Jonas and Sabine handled the legal paperwork at the clerk's office. The clerk was a nervous man named Porter, who clearly knew about Hale's interest in the Crossland, but couldn't legally refuse to file their marriage license. "This will be recorded today," Porter assured them, his hands shaking slightly as he filled out the forms. "Legal and binding as of the ceremony. But Mr. Hale, he's not going to be happy about this." "That's not our concern," Sabine said firmly. "Just make sure everything's filed properly." Within 2 hours, Hutchins had assembled a small group in the back room of his store. Reverend Williams, a kind-faced man in his 60s, 3 other settlement residents willing to serve as witnesses, and a few others who'd come out of curiosity or solidarity. The ceremony was simple, almost stark in its brevity. They had no flowers, no music, no decoration, just 2 people standing before witnesses, speaking vows that carried the weight of genuine commitment, despite the practical circumstances that prompted them. Reverend Williams opened his worn Bible and began, "We are gathered here in the sight of God and these witnesses to join Jonas Calder and Sabine Cross in holy matrimony. This is not a commitment to be entered into lightly, but reverently, deliberately, and in accordance with the purposes for which it was instituted by God." He spoke the traditional words, and Jonas listened with half his attention on the ceremony and half on Sabine beside him. She stood straight and proud, her hand firm in his, her eyes dry but bright with emotion. "Jonas Calder, do you take Sabine Cross to be your lawfully wedded wife? To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do you part?" "I do." Jonas's voice was steady, clear, carrying no doubt. "Sabine Cross, do you take Jonas Calder to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do you part?" Sabine's voice was equally firm. "I do." "The rings." Jonas produced the wooden ring he'd carved, and with Sabine's hand, trembling just slightly in his, he slipped it onto her finger. "With this ring I thee wed. I promise to stand beside you, to work with you, to build a life with you. I promise partnership, respect and love. Today, and all the days were given." Sabine had no ring to give him in return. They hadn't thought that far ahead. But she took his hand in both of hers and spoke with quiet intensity. "I have no ring to give you yet, but I give you my word. I promise to trust you, to let you stand with me, rather than always standing alone. I promise honesty, partnership, and love. I promise to build with you what we couldn't build separately. Today and always." Reverend Williams smiled. "By the power vested in me by the territory of Montana, and in the sight of God and these witnesses, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Jonas, you may kiss your bride." Jonas cupped Sabine's face gently and kissed her, a kiss that was both tender and certain, sealing the promise they'd just made to each other. When they pulled apart, Sabine was smiling through tears, and Jonas felt his own eyes burning. The witnesses applauded, and Hutchins produced a bottle of whiskey for those who wanted it. Jonas declined, as always, but he raised a cup of water alongside Sabine as the gathered group toasted their marriage. "To the Calders," Hutchins said, "may your partnership be long and prosperous, and may Hale choke on his own schemes." The toast drew laughter and agreement, and for a moment, surrounded by well-wishers in the warm store, Jonas allowed himself to feel pure joy. He'd married Sabine. She was his wife, he was her husband, and whatever came next, they'd face it together. But the joy was short-lived. As they were signing the final documents, making their marriage officially recorded, the door to the store burst open, and Tom Fletcher stood there, breathing hard. "Hale knows," he said without preamble. "Someone told him you were here getting married. He's gathering men. I think he means to stop you from making it back to the mountain." The room went silent. Jonas felt Sabine tense beside him, her hand finding his. "How many men?" Jonas asked. 6, maybe 8, armed. He's calling it a legal action, says he's going to serve papers claiming the land before you can use the marriage to challenge him. But Jonas, I've seen the men he's bringing. These aren't lawyers. They're the kind of men who solve problems with violence. Sabine's jaw set in a hard line. Then we need to move fast. Get back to the cabin before they can cut us off. You'll never make it, one of the witnesses said. A rancher named Coleman, who'd worked with Samuel Cross years ago. Hale will have the trail watched. He knows you have to go back up the mountain. Then we don't take the trail, Sabine said. There are other ways up, routes only locals know. Harder going, especially with the snow. But if we move now... You'll still be outnumbered if they find you, Hutchins interrupted. And they will find you. Hale's men know these mountains too. Then we even the odds. Jonas turned to the assembled group. You've all stood as witnesses to our marriage. Now I'm asking, will you stand with us against Hale? Not to fight necessarily, but to be present. To make sure whatever happens, happens with witnesses. To make it clear that Hale can't act outside the law without consequences. There was a moment of heavy silence. These were practical people, ranchers and merchants, who understood that standing against Marcus Hale could cost them dearly. But Jonas saw something shift in their faces as they looked at him and Sabine. A decision being made, principles being chosen over comfort. Coleman spoke first. Samuel Cross was a good man, and his daughter is cut from the same cloth. I'll stand with you, as will I, Hutchins added. Time someone told Hale he doesn't own this settlement just because he has money. One by one, the others agreed. Not all of them, but enough. Within minutes, a group of 7 had formed, armed and determined, ready to escort Jonas and Sabine back to their land. Reverend Williams blessed them before they left. Go with God, and remember, the righteous need not fear, for their cause is just. But be wise as serpents and gentle as doves. Don't let Hale provoke you into violence if it can be avoided. We won't start it, Jonas promised. But we'll finish it if we have to. They rode out as a group, taking the back trails Sabine knew. The going was slow. The alternate route was rougher, steeper, more treacherous in the snow. But it gave them the advantage of surprise. If Hale's men were watching the main trail, they wouldn't see this approach. As they climbed, Jonas found himself riding beside Coleman. The older rancher kept a watchful eye on the terrain, his rifle loose in its scabbard but ready. You love her? Coleman asked without preamble. Yes. Good. She deserves that. Deserves someone who sees her strength as something to honor, not something to break. Coleman was quiet for a moment. Her father was the same way with her mother. Loved her fierce and true. Treated her like a full partner in everything. That's rare in a marriage. Hold on to it. I intend to. They rode in silence for a while longer. Then Coleman spoke again. Things might get ugly up there. Hale's not the kind to back down gracefully. You prepared for that? Jonas thought about the sabotaged rope, about Hale's veiled threats, about everything they stood to lose. As prepared as I can be. But Coleman, if it comes to violence, you and the others don't have to fight. Your presence is enough. Your witness is enough, maybe. But sometimes witness isn't sufficient. Sometimes evil has to be opposed directly or it spreads. Coleman adjusted his hat. We'll see what's needed when we get there. As they climbed higher, the sun beginning its descent toward the western horizon, Jonas felt the tension building. They were committed now, to the marriage, to the fight, to whatever came next. There was no backing down, no turning aside. Beside him, Sabine rode with fierce determination, the wooden ring visible on her finger. She caught his eye and gave him a small, tight smile that carried both love and resolve. They'd made their choice. They'd married, joined their lives together, committed to standing against Hale's schemes. Now they'd see it through, whatever the cost. The cabin came into view as the sun touched the peaks, golden lights slanting across the snow. And there, as they'd feared, were horses tethered near the woodshed, at least 6 of them. Hale had beaten them there. Jonas felt Sabine tense beside him, saw her hand move to the rifle on her saddle. But before anyone could act, Hutchins held up a hand. Wait, let's approach carefully all together. Let them see we're not alone, that there are witnesses. Maybe we can still resolve this without bloodshed. They rode in as a group, making no attempt at stealth. As they approached, men emerged from around the cabin. Hale's hired hands, rough-looking men with weapons visible. And among them, standing calm and confident, was Marcus Hale himself. Mrs. Calder, Hale said, emphasizing the title with mock courtesy. Or may I still call you Miss Cross? I understand congratulations are in order. A hasty marriage, but legal nonetheless. How fortunate for you. State your business and leave my land, Sabine said coldly. Your land? Hale smiled. That's the question, isn't it? I have papers here. Legal documents challenging your claim based on the original land grant conditions. I'm here to serve them officially and to take possession of the disputed property until the matter can be resolved in court. You have no right, Jonas started, but Hale cut him off. I have every right. Mr. Calder, this is a legal matter being handled through legal channels. Your marriage, while creative, doesn't automatically resolve the questions about the original claim. That will have to be decided by a judge. Then it will be decided by a judge, Sabine said. But until it is, this is still my land and you're trespassing. You and your men need to leave. Now. Hale's pleasant expression didn't change, but his eyes went cold. I don't think so. You see, Mrs. Calder, possession is 9/10 of the law. If I'm in possession of the land when this goes to court, the burden of proof shifts to you. And given the questionable nature of your claim, there's nothing questionable about it, Hutchins interrupted, urging his horse forward. Samuel Cross held this land legally for 30 years. His daughter inherited it legally, and now her husband stands with her in that claim. You're the one operating outside the law, Hale. These men are witnesses to that fact. Hale's jaw tightened as he looked at the group that had accompanied Jonas and Sabine. Witnesses to what? A legal serving of papers? There's nothing improper happening here. Then you won't mind if we all stay, Coleman added. To witness this legal process you're so confident about, the tension ratcheted higher. Hale's men shifted, hands moving closer to weapons. The group from the settlement responded in kind, rifles coming to ready positions without quite being aimed. They stood there in the fading light, two groups facing each other across snow-covered ground. The cabin standing silent witness to the confrontation. Jonas felt his heart pounding, felt Sabine's presence beside him like a physical force. This was it, the moment everything had been building toward. The fight for Sabine's land, for their future, for the principle that determination and love could overcome greed and power. How it would end, Jonas didn't know. But he knew this. He wouldn't back down. Neither would Sabine. And surrounded by people willing to stand with them, they had a chance. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. Husband and wife, partners in every sense, ready to defend what was theirs. The sun dropped lower, shadows lengthening across the snow. And in the gathering darkness, the battle for Cross Mountain was about to begin. The standoff held for a long, tense moment, both groups sizing each other up across the snow-covered yard. Jonas could feel the weight of the rifle above the cabin door. Sabine's father's trusted weapon, the one that had protected this land for decades. It represented everything they were fighting for: heritage, home, the right to defend what was yours. Hale broke the silence first. This doesn't have to become unpleasant. I have legal papers to serve, that's all. Once they're delivered, my business here is done. Then deliver them and leave, Sabine said flatly. Hale reached into his coat and produced a sheaf of documents. One of his men started to move forward to deliver them, but Jonas urged Temperance forward first, positioning himself between the man and Sabine. I'll take them, Jonas said. The hired hand looked to Hale, who nodded curtly. The papers were handed over, and Jonas scanned them quickly. Legal language filled the pages, but the intent was clear. Hale was formally challenging the validity of the Cross family claim based on the old territorial laws. Requesting immediate possession pending court review. These papers don't give you the right to stay on this land, Jonas said. They request a court review. Until a judge rules, Sabine's claim stands. That's a matter of interpretation, Hale replied smoothly. My lawyers would argue differently. But fine, we'll leave. For now. Just remember, Mrs. Calder, this is far from over. The court date is set for 3 weeks from now. You'll need to appear with evidence supporting your claim, or this land will be awarded to me by default. We'll be there, Sabine said. With our marriage certificate, our documentation of continuous occupation and improvement, and witnesses to testify to the legitimacy of our claim. We'll see if that's sufficient." Sir Hale mounted his horse, his men following suit. But before leaving, he looked directly at Jonas. "You made your choice, Mr. Calder. I hope it was worth it. Because when this land is mine, and it will be mine, you'll have tied yourself to a woman with nothing. Just something to think about." "I already have everything that matters," Jonas replied. "Something you'll never understand." Hale's expression darkened, but he turned his horse and led his men down the mountain trail. The group from the settlement waited until they were out of sight before anyone relaxed. Hutchins dismounted, approaching Jonas and Sabine. "You've got 3 weeks to build your case. That's not much time, especially with winter conditions. You'll need to gather documents, find witnesses, maybe even hire a lawyer of your own. We'll manage," Sabine said, though Jonas could hear the strain in her voice. "Thank you, all of you, for standing with us today. It meant more than you know." Coleman cleared his throat. "Hale's not going to let this go easily. He'll look for ways to undermine your case, maybe try to intimidate witnesses or create new problems. You two need to be careful, and you need to be smart about how you build your defense." "We will be," Jonas assured him. "But right now we need to finish cutting and hauling that timber. Not just for the money to pay the debt, but to prove continuous improvement of the land. The more we can show we're actively working and developing this property, the stronger our case." The settlement group stayed for another hour, helping Jonas and Sabine secure the cabin and discussing strategy for the upcoming court battle. By the time they left, full darkness had fallen, and Jonas and Sabine were alone again, married now, facing a deadline, but at least facing it together. Inside the cabin, Sabine sank into a chair, the accumulated stress of the day finally showing in her posture. Jonas moved to the stove, starting coffee, giving her a moment to process. "We did it," she said quietly. "We're married. Legally, officially married. We are." Jonas brought her coffee, then sat across from her. "Any regrets?" "About marrying you?" "No. About the circumstances? Yes, you deserved better than a ceremony performed under threat. With legal strategy as much a consideration as love. I got what I wanted. You as my wife. A partnership I believe in. A fight I'm proud to be part of. The rest is just details." Sabine reached across the table, taking his hand. The wooden ring on her finger caught the firelight, simple and solid. "I love you, Jonas Calder. I don't say it easily, and I don't say it lightly. But I love you. I love you too, Sabine Calder." He smiled at the name. "You're going to have to get used to that." "Sabine Calder," she repeated, testing it. "It sounds strange, but good. Like I'm not alone anymore. You're not. You'll never be alone again, as long as I'm breathing." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, hands clasped, both processing the magnitude of what they'd done. They'd married for practical reasons, yes, but the foundation was real love, genuine partnership, a commitment that went far deeper than legal convenience. Finally, Sabine spoke again. "We need to talk about sleeping arrangements. Now that we're married, it's not proper for you to sleep by the fire anymore." Jonas felt his pulse quicken. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that we're husband and wife, and we should start acting like it." She met his eyes directly. "Unless you'd rather wait." "No." Jonas's voice was firm. "I don't want to wait. I want everything with you, Sabine. Everything a marriage should be." Sabine stood, holding out her hand. "Then come to bed, husband. Let's start building this life we've promised each other." Jonas took her hand and let her lead him to the curtained-off area where her bed stood. His heart was pounding, not from fear or uncertainty, but from the weight of the moment. He'd waited his whole life for this, for genuine intimacy built on real commitment and love. Sabine turned to face him in the dim light filtering through the curtain. Her hands came up to cup his face, and when she kissed him, it was different from before, deeper, more certain, filled with promise. "I've never done this either," she admitted quietly. "So we'll figure it out together." "Together," Jonas agreed, and pulled her close. What followed was tender and awkward and beautiful, two people learning each other, building intimacy with patience and care. There was laughter when things didn't go smoothly, gentleness when nervousness showed, and an overwhelming sense of rightness that this was how it should be. Not rushed or casual, but meaningful. The physical expression of the commitment they'd made. Afterward, lying together in the narrow bed, Sabine rested her head on Jonas's chest, and he wrapped his arms around her, feeling the steady beat of her heart against his. "This is what I was waiting for," Jonas said quietly. "Not just the physical part, though that was—" He felt Sabine smile against his chest. "But this, the intimacy of lying here with you, knowing we're building something real together." "I never thought I'd have this," Sabine admitted. "I'd convinced myself I didn't want it, didn't need it. But Jonas, having you here, being your wife, it's better than I imagined. Scarier too, because now I have so much more to lose. You're not going to lose me, and you're not going to lose this land. We'll fight hell with everything we have, and we'll win. Because we're not just fighting for property, we're fighting for our future, for the life we want to build. 3 weeks until the court date. 3 weeks to gather evidence, strengthen our case, and prove we deserve to keep this land. Then that's what we'll do." Jonas pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "Tomorrow we start working on the timber again. We finish the cutting, haul it down to the mill, pay off the debt. That removes one of Hale's pressure points. Then we focus on documenting everything, every improvement we've made, every legitimate use of this land, every reason a court should recognize our claim. It's a lot to accomplish in 3 weeks. Good thing we work well together." Sabine shifted, looking up at him in the darkness. "How are you so calm? Aren't you worried about what might happen?" "Terrified," Jonas admitted. "But worry doesn't change outcomes, preparation does. So we prepare as best we can, we fight as hard as we can, and we trust that doing the right thing will matter in the end. And if it doesn't, if Hale wins despite everything?" Jonas was quiet for a moment, considering. "Then we start over somewhere else, together. The land matters, Sabine, I know how much. But you matter more. If we lose this fight, we'll grieve it, and then we'll find another mountain, another piece of ground to call ours. Because what we have now, this partnership, this love, that's worth more than any property." Sabine's arms tightened around him. "I don't want to lose this place. It's all I have left of my family, I know, and we'll do everything possible to keep it. But if the worst happens, know that you're not losing everything. You have me. You have us. And that's something no court can take away." They lay there in the darkness, holding each other, drawing strength from their connection. Outside, the mountain night was cold and clear, stars bright in the winter sky. Inside, wrapped in each other's arms, Jonas and Sabine found warmth and certainty. They'd married under pressure, yes, but what they'd built was real, a foundation strong enough to weather whatever storms came. And whatever the court decided, whatever Hale threw at them next, they'd face it as they'd faced everything else, together. Morning came too early, but Jonas woke with a sense of purpose that eclipsed his fatigue. Beside him, Sabine stirred, and he felt the unfamiliar pleasure of waking next to someone he loved. "Good morning, wife," he murmured. Sabine smiled, her eyes still closed. "Good morning, husband. Now get up, we have work to do." They rose and dressed, moving around each other with the new intimacy of a married couple. Over breakfast they planned their day, finishing the timber cutting, beginning the hauling process, organizing the documentation they'd need for court. "We should also send word to the settlement," Sabine said. "Ask people to write statements about my father's ownership, about my continuous occupation, about the improvements I've made over the years. The more witnesses we can present, the better. I'll ride down this afternoon. Start gathering those statements. You can work on organizing our documents, the original land grant, if you have it, records of improvements, anything that supports our case." They were interrupted by a knock at the door, surprising given how remote the cabin was. Jonas moved to answer it, his hand instinctively near his belt, where he'd taken to keeping a knife. Bill Hutchins stood outside, looking concerned. "Morning, Jonas. Sabine, I rode up early. There's something you need to know." They invited him in, offering coffee, which he accepted gratefully. After warming his hands on the cup, Hutchins spoke. "Fletcher came by the store last night late. Said he needed to talk to you both, but he was too scared to ride up here himself. Hale's men have been watching his place since he helped warn you yesterday. What did he want to tell us? Sabine asked. Hale's lawyers found something else, another complication with the land claim. Apparently, there was a lien filed against the property years ago, during your father's time. It was supposed to be paid off, but the paperwork was never properly filed. Hale's arguing that the unresolved lien gives him additional grounds to challenge your ownership. Jonas felt cold settle in his stomach. What kind of lien? For materials and labor during a bad year. Your father borrowed against the land to pay for supplies. The debt was paid. Samuel told Fletcher that himself, but if there's no paper trail proving it was satisfied, then Hale can argue the claim is clouded, Sabine finished, her voice tight, which gives him more ammunition in court. Fletcher says the original creditor is long dead, and his records were lost in a fire 5 years ago. Without documentation proving the debt was paid, it's your word against missing paperwork. Sabine stood abruptly, pacing to the window. Jonas could see the tension in her shoulders, the fear she was fighting to control. Another obstacle, another complication, another way Hale was trying to strip away everything she had. There has to be proof somewhere, Jonas said. Someone who witnessed the payment, records in another location, something. That's what Fletcher suggested looking for. He's trying to help, quietly, because he's terrified of Hale, but he thinks there might be old banking records in the territorial office. If you know where to look, then that's what we do, Jonas said firmly. We find the proof. Hutchins, can you help us search the territorial records? I can try, but it'll take time. Time you don't have much of. We'll make the time. Jonas looked at Sabine, seeing the determination fighting past her fear. We've come this far. We're not giving up now. After Hutchins left, promising to start the search for the old records, Jonas and Sabine stood together in the cabin, facing the reality of their situation. The odds were stacking against them. The questionable land grant, the mysterious lien, Hale's resources and influence. But they also had something Hale didn't: genuine commitment, real partnership, and the support of people who believed in their cause. We're going to lose, Sabine said quietly. Aren't we? Hale has too much power, too many resources. He's going to find a way to take this land no matter what we do. Jonas moved to her, taking her shoulders gently. Maybe, but we haven't lost yet. And even if the worst happens, even if every legal maneuver fails, we still have each other. We're still married, still partners, still building a life together. The location might change, but the foundation won't. You make it sound so simple. It is simple. Hard but simple. We love each other. We're committed to each other, and everything else is just logistics. He pulled her close. I meant my vows, Sabine. For better or worse, richer or poorer. If we end up poor and on different land, we'll still have the better part. We'll have each other. Sabine held onto him tightly, and Jonas felt her trembling, not from cold, but from the weight of everything bearing down on them. He held her, offering what comfort he could, knowing that words could only do so much, but actions could change outcomes. And they still had 3 weeks to act, to fight, to prove they deserved to keep this land and this life they were building. Come on, Jonas finally said, pulling back. Let's get to work on that timber. One problem at a time, one day at a time. We'll face whatever comes, but we'll face it actively, not passively waiting for defeat. Sabine nodded, composing herself. You're right. We fight until there's nothing left to fight with. That's what my father would have done. That's what we'll do. They gathered their gear and headed out into the cold morning, ready to continue the work that would either save them, or at the very least, let them say they'd given everything they had to the fight. The mountain watched, silent and implacable, as it had watched generations of the Cross family build their lives on its slopes. Whatever came next, the mountain would remain. But whether Jonas and Sabine would remain with it, only time would tell. The days that followed blurred into a relentless cycle of work, research, and preparation. Jonas and Sabine pushed themselves to the breaking point, cutting and hauling timber by day, organizing documents and gathering testimony by night. The wooden ring on Sabine's finger became scuffed and worn from the labor, but she refused to take it off, saying it reminded her what they were fighting for. On the 5th day after their marriage, they made the journey down to the Valley Mill with their first load of timber. The mill owner, a fair-minded man named Garrett, inspected their load and nodded approvingly. "Premium quality," he said. "Your father taught you well, Mrs. Calder. I'll give you top price for this lot." The money from that first sale, nearly $100, went immediately to paying down Sabine's debt to Hale. Jonas rode to Hale's bank and made the payment in person, insisting on a receipt that clearly documented the transaction. They made 2 more hauls over the next 6 days. By the 13th day after their marriage, Jonas walked into Hale's bank with the final payment, $327. Covering the principal and all accumulated interest, Hale himself was present. He watched with barely concealed anger as Jonas counted out the money and demanded a receipt marked "paid in full." "You've paid the debt," Hale said flatly. "Congratulations. But it changes nothing regarding the land claim. The court date stands." "That was the point," Jonas replied. "Now when we go before the judge, we go with clean books and clear conscience." Bill Hutchins had been searching the territorial records for proof of the lien payment, but so far had found nothing. The records from that period were incomplete and poorly organized. On the 17th day after their marriage, with Sheen, less than a week before the court date, Jonas was in the cabin organizing their documents when he noticed something odd. The floorboards near the fireplace had a slight irregularity, a section that didn't quite match the rest. "Sabine," he called. "Come look at this." Together they examined the floor. Jonas found a hidden seam, and with careful prying, they lifted a short section of boards to reveal a small cavity beneath. Inside was a metal box, rusted but intact. Sabine's hands shook as she lifted it out. "My father's lockbox. I didn't know. I never knew he had this." The box was locked, but the mechanism was old and corroded. Jonas worked at it carefully, and after several minutes, it opened with a metallic click. Inside were documents, old papers, carefully preserved. And there, near the bottom, a document that made Jonas's heart leap. "Satisfaction of lien," he read aloud. "Dated 22 years ago, signed by the original creditor and witnessed by 2 people. This proves your father paid off the debt, Sabine. This is what we need." Sabine stared at the document, tears streaming down her face. "He kept it. All these years he kept the proof safe." There was also a letter addressed simply, "To my daughter." Sabine opened it with trembling hands and read aloud, "My dearest Sabine, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you've had need to find these papers. This land is yours by right, earned by your grandfather's sweat, preserved by my labor, and now held by your determination. Hold fast, daughter. This ground is cross ground, and it will remain so as long as any of us have breath to defend it. Your loving father, Samuel Cross." Sabine pressed the letter to her chest, sobbing openly now. Jonas held her, letting her grieve and find strength in equal measure. "We have everything we need now," Jonas said quietly. "We can win this." They worked late into the night, organizing every document, cross-referencing every piece of evidence. Jonas pulled out his pocket watch at one point, checking the time by lamplight. "And then he froze, Sabine," he said slowly. "My watch! It's running!" She looked up from her papers. "What?" Jonas held up the watch. The hands that had been frozen at 3:47 for 6 years were now moving, ticking steadily forward. "It's working. I don't know how or why, but it's working." Sabine came to look, wonder in her eyes. "It's a sign. Time to move forward. Time to stop being stuck in what was and embrace what is." Jonas carefully wound the watch, setting it to the correct time. "For my parents, and for us, for the life we're building." The court hearing was held in the settlement's largest building, the community hall. A traveling circuit judge named Harrison presided, a severe-looking man in his 60s who had a reputation for fairness. Hale's lawyers were 3 city men in expensive suits. Jonas and Sabine had Hutchins with them, and they'd pooled money to hire a local attorney named Morrison, not as polished as Hale's team, but honest and knowledgeable about territorial land law. The hall was packed with townspeople. Jonas saw Garrett from the mill, Coleman and his family, Reverend Williams, and many others who'd signed statements or offered help. Judge Harrison called the proceedings to order with a sharp rap of his gavel. Hale's lead attorney, Foster, launched into his argument. He detailed the old territorial law, questioned Samuel Cross's satisfaction of the original grant conditions, raised the lien issue, and painted Sabine as someone trying to hold on to land she had no legal right to claim. Furthermore, Your Honor, Foster concluded, Mrs. Calder's recent marriage appears to be a transparent attempt to circumvent the law. Jonas felt anger rise in his chest, but Morrison touched his arm, cautioning patience. When Foster finished, Morrison stood for their side. Your Honor, Mrs. Calder's claim to this land is unassailable. We have the original land grant, properly filed and recorded. We have documentation of continuous occupation spanning 3 generations. We have testimony from a dozen witnesses. And regarding the lien Mr. Foster mentioned, we have the satisfaction document, proving it was paid in full over 20 years ago. Morrison presented the document from Samuel's lockbox, and Jonas saw Hale's expression darken. The arguments went back and forth for hours. Jonas and Sabine both testified, speaking honestly about their partnership, their marriage, and their legitimate claim to the land. Finally, Judge Harrison called a recess to review the evidence. After an hour that felt like an eternity, he returned. I've reviewed all the evidence presented today, Harrison began. The evidence shows that the original land grant was properly filed and met the conditions required. Samuel Cross and his family occupied and improved the land continuously for decades. The lien has been proven satisfied. That removes any cloud on the title. Jonas felt hope rising, but kept his expression neutral. As for the territorial law regarding marriage and ownership, yes, such laws existed, but they've been superseded by more recent statutes recognizing women's property rights. More importantly, Mrs. Calder is now married, which would satisfy even the old requirements. The suggestion that her marriage is fraudulent is not supported by evidence. Harrison fixed his gaze on Hale's lawyers. What I see here is an attempt to use technicalities and outdated laws to strip a legitimate property owner of her land. That's not how justice works in my court. He raised his gavel. It is the judgment of this court that Sabine Calder's claim to the disputed property is valid and unassailable. Mr. Hale's challenge is dismissed with prejudice. Mrs. Calder is confirmed as the legal owner of said property. Furthermore, Mr. Hale is ordered to pay court costs. This case is closed. The gavel came down with a sharp crack, and the hall erupted in applause. Jonas pulled Sabine into his arms, feeling her shake with relief and joy. They'd won. That night, back in their cabin on the mountain, Jonas and Sabine sat by the fire, holding each other close. We did it, Sabine said softly. The land is ours, Jonas, truly ours. It always was yours. We just made the court recognize the truth. He kissed her temple. But yes, we did it, together. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the fire burn low. Jonas, about your watch, you said it started working again? He pulled it out, showing her the steadily ticking hands. Started sometime in the last few days. Sabine took the watch, examining it closely. Maybe it just needed the right time to start again, like us. We needed the right time, the right circumstances, the right partnership to move forward. Maybe so. Jonas took the watch back. My father would have liked you. My father would have liked you too. He'd be proud that I found someone who sees me as a partner. They went to bed soon after, exhausted but content. Outside, the mountains stood silent under the stars, witness to another generation claiming their place on its slopes. The fight was over. The victory was won, and the future stretched before them, full of possibility and promise. Spring came to the mountain with the gentleness of an answered prayer. Snow melted in crystalline rivulets, feeding streams that sang through the valleys. New grass pushed up through the thawing earth, and the aspens began their transformation from bare branches to trembling green. The land, which had been locked in winter's grip for so long, was waking to warmth and possibility. Jonas stood outside the cabin in the early morning light, watching Sabine work in the garden plot they'd expanded together. 6 weeks had passed since the court victory, and the transformation wasn't just in the landscape. It was in them, in the life they were building with hands no longer fighting for survival, but creating something more. The cabin itself had changed. New shutters hung on the windows. Jonas's careful work painted a deep green that Sabine had chosen. The roof had been patched and reinforced. The lean-to had been expanded into a proper small barn, housing both horses comfortably, and most significantly, Jonas was carving new designs into the cabin door. Not just functional repairs, but decoration. Their initials intertwined, surrounded by mountain peaks and pine branches. A marker that this was their home, built on love as much as determination. "You're staring," Sabine called without looking up from her planting. "If you're going to stand there, you might as well help." Jonas smiled and joined her, kneeling in the soft earth. They worked side by side, planting vegetables and herbs, their movements synchronized from months of partnership. The wooden ring on Sabine's finger was even more worn now, darkened by weather and work, but she still refused the gold band Jonas had offered to buy. "This one tells our story," she'd said. "Every scratch, every mark, it's us. That matters more than shine." As they worked, Jonas's mind drifted to the changes that had followed their victory. Hale had left the territory shortly after the court decision, his influence broken by the public defeat. The settlement had rallied around Jonas and Sabine, treating them with newfound respect. Bill Hutchins had extended unlimited credit at the store, not that they needed it now. With the timber money carefully saved and their debts cleared, they'd use some of that money to hire a proper surveyor who confirmed what the old maps had suggested. There were indeed valuable mineral deposits on their land, not enough to make them wealthy overnight, but enough to provide security and options for the future. They'd filed the necessary claims, ensuring that any development would happen on their terms, in their time. "I've been thinking," Sabine said, breaking into his thoughts, "about hiring help come summer, not to replace what we do, but to expand. Maybe take on someone young, the way you came to me. Someone who wants to learn, who'll respect the land and the work. Passing on what you know," Jonas said. "Your father would like that." "Our father," Sabine corrected gently. "He's yours now too, through me. Just as your parents are mine through you. That's what marriage means, carrying each other's histories, honoring each other's legacies." Jonas reached over and squeezed her hand, dirt and all. "I like that. Building on what came before, while creating something new." They finished the planting as the sun climbed higher, warming the mountain air. Inside the cabin, they washed up and sat down to a breakfast that had become their ritual. Fresh bread, eggs from the chickens they'd acquired, coffee strong enough to fuel the day's work. Sabine had begun cooking from her mother's recipe book, slowly reclaiming that part of her heritage she'd thought lost. The cabin now sometimes smelled of things beyond just survival: cinnamon and vanilla, roasted herbs, the sweetness of preserved fruit. It was a small thing, but it represented something larger, Sabine allowing herself to be more than just the mountain woman who worked alone. She could be that, and also someone who baked cakes, who hummed while cooking, who took pleasure in domestic comforts as well as outdoor labor. "There's something else I want to talk about," Sabine said as they finished eating. Her hand moved unconsciously to her stomach, a gesture Jonas had noticed her making more frequently in recent days. "What is it?" he asked, though something in her expression made his heart rate quicken. I think I'm carrying a child. It's early still and I'm not certain, but all the signs." She looked at him with a mixture of joy and fear. "We're going to be parents." Jonas felt the world tilt and resettle, everything suddenly sharper and more significant. A child, their child, the next generation of this family they were building. "Are you happy?" Sabine asked, her voice uncertain. "I know we haven't talked about it much, and it's sooner than we might have planned." Jonas was around the table in an instant, pulling her into his arms. Happy, Sabine? There aren't words. A child, our child. Growing up here, learning from both of us, carrying forward everything we're building. Yes, I'm happy. I'm overwhelmed and terrified and happier than I've ever been. Sabine laughed, the sound watery with emotion. Terrified is right. I don't know how to be a mother. My own died when I was born. What if then we'll learn together, the same way we've learned everything else. And Sabine, you know more about raising someone to be strong and capable than anyone I've ever met. Our child will be fortunate to have you as a mother. They held each other for a long moment, both processing the magnitude of this new chapter. A child changed everything, increased the stakes, the responsibilities, the need to ensure this land remained secure for future generations. Later that afternoon, Jonas found himself back at the cabin door, working on the carving. He added a small detail he hadn't originally planned, a tiny sapling growing between the intertwined initials. A symbol of new life, new growth, the future they were creating. Sabine came to watch him work, her hand resting on his shoulder. It's beautiful. You're getting good at this. I have good motivation. Jonas set down his carving tools and stood, admiring the work. Everything we've fought for, everything we've built, it all comes down to this. A home, a family, a legacy worth protecting and worth passing on. No cowboy lasted 1 week, Sabine said softly, echoing the words that had once been a point of pride, a defense against connection. Until you. Until the one who stayed. Until the one who refused to leave, Jonas corrected. Because I saw what everyone else missed. Not a mountain woman who needed taming or changing, but a partner worth fighting beside. Worth building a life with. Sabine leaned against him, and they stood together in the doorway, literally on the threshold between inside and outside, between past and future. Behind them, the cabin held everything they'd preserved and created. Before them, the mountain stretched in endless possibility. Do you ever regret it? Sabine asked. Riding up here that day? Everything you've had to face and fight for? Jonas thought about the question seriously, honoring it with genuine reflection. He thought about the exhaustion, the danger, the legal battles and physical threats. He thought about the life he might have had if he'd stayed in the valley, working ranches, following easier paths. Then he thought about Sabine, the woman he'd married, the partner he'd found, the love that had grown between them through shared struggle and triumph. He thought about the child growing inside her, about the land they'd secured, about the future they were building together. No, he said finally, not for a single moment. Every hardship, every battle, it brought us here, to this moment, to this life. I'd do it all again exactly the same. Sabine turned to look up at him, and Jonas saw tears shining in her eyes, not of sadness, but of gratitude and love. So would I. Every test I put you through, every wall I built, you met them all with patience and determination. You didn't try to rescue me or change me. You just stood beside me and let me see that partnership doesn't mean weakness. They kissed, there in the doorway with the spring sun warming their faces and the mountain bearing witness to their love. It was a kiss that tasted of promise and permanence, of battles won and a future secure. When they pulled apart, Sabine smiled, a full, genuine smile that transformed her face. Come on, husband. We have work to do. Gardens to tend, fences to mend, a future to build. Lead the way, wife. I'm right beside you. They walked together into the spring afternoon, moving with the easy synchronization of true partners. The cabin door stood open behind them, its new carving catching the light, initials intertwined, a sapling growing. A home claimed and defended and cherished. The mountain had watched generations come and go, had seen struggle and triumph, had borne witness to lives built on its slopes. Now it watched Jonas and Sabine Calder begin the next chapter of their story, adding their thread to the tapestry of mountain life. Some cowboys had come to this mountain thinking to prove something, to tame something wild, to claim victory over a woman who needed no conquering. They'd all left, defeated by their own expectations and limitations, but one cowboy had come differently. He'd come to learn, to grow, to find partnership rather than dominance. And he'd stayed, not because he'd won some contest, but because he'd found something worth staying for. He'd found home. He'd found love. He'd found Sabine, and in the end, that was the only victory that mattered. Not the court decision or the defeated rival or the secured land, though all of those were significant. The real victory was in the life they were building together, in the love that had grown through adversity, in the partnership that honored both their strengths. No cowboy lasted 1 week with the mountain woman, until the virgin cowboy refused to leave. And in refusing to leave, in choosing to stay and fight and build alongside her, he'd found everything he'd been searching for. The sun moved across the sky, painting the mountain in gold and shadow. Inside the cabin, the fire would need tending soon, and there was always work waiting. But for this moment, Jonas and Sabine simply existed together. Married, partnered, expectant parents, landowners, survivors of battles both legal and personal. They'd fought for what was theirs. They'd won. And now they'd build a future worthy of the fight, together, always together, as it should be.